Not all stories are told in daylight. Here we tell you the stories they warn you not to repeat, and the ones they pray aren't true. It's been a strange journey so far, and I can't thank you enough for being part of it. When this channel first started, it was just stories, fragments of encounters passed around like whispers in the dark. But thanks to all of you, the Cryptid Tapes has grown into something more. Hitting 100 subscribers might not sound like much to some, but to me, it means there are over 100 people out there who share the same fascination, the same uneasy curiosity for the things that move unseen in the forests. So tonight, we're going back through it all. The ranger accounts, the voices from the wilderness, and the encounters that still haven't left our minds. If you've enjoyed these stories and want to help the channel keep growing, please leave a like, drop a comment, and subscribe. It helps way more than you think. Now, let's return to where it all began. Ask any ranger, and they'll tell you most nights in the backcountry are routine. Boring is what they want. But every ranger has one story that isn't boring. The night they never wrote in their report. The night they still can't explain. Tonight, I have 3 of those stories. One ranger on tower duty, alone, overnight, discovers a logbook is still being written. Another, sent to a closed campground, finds the lake showing reflections that don't match the shore. And a third, patrolling for poachers, learns that not every howl in the forest belongs to a wolf. 3 rangers, 3 nights, 3 stories that still haunt them. I used to think the loneliest sound in the park was wind in dead pines. Spend enough nights on the backcountry patrol and you'll learn wind has moods. The hollow moan through the snags, the hiss across ice, the low, embarrassed exhale when a gust dies on a rock. You file it away with other ranger things, campfire smoke in your hair, the way your radio feels heavier after midnight. You tell yourself you know the noises that belong out there. Then you volunteer to sit a tower in the off-season, and the noises learn your name. It was January, dead quiet in the shoulder months. Our district isn't one of the famous parks. It's a sprawl of national forest and state land stitched together by logging roads and old fire scars. Spruce ridges, bog pockets, a river that runs brown as tea. We'd had weird winter lightning 2 nights in a row, enough to make dispatch twitchy about strikes smouldering under crusted snow. The old Cedar Knob lookout, a retired fire tower, was closest to a cluster of private inn-holdings, so the chief wanted a ranger up there overnight for eyes on and radio relay until a weather break. Everyone else had reasons to say no. I didn't. I told myself I liked towers. I liked checklists. I liked being the spine in the middle of the map you draw lines around. If I'm honest, I also like the way the station goes quiet when you take a job nobody else wants. Cedar Knob is 32 feet to the catwalk, roughly 40 to the cab. Not a cathedral of a tower, just an old steel stick bolted onto a boulder. Guy wires whistling when the wind's right. The catwalk boards flex under you if you don't trust your feet. I parked the rig in the turnout, shouldered a pack with a thermos, batteries, and the kind of dinner that eat with a spoon, and climbed. The cab smelled like dust and mice. Somebody had left a coil stove on the counter 30 years ago and then forgotten the coil. The way people forget their youth. Present, useless, oddly precious. A map table sat under the windows. The kind with pencil lines and grease pencil circles for old smokes. Where the Osborne firefinder used to be was a square of darker plywood, like a missing tooth. The logbook was there too, on the shelf below the north window. It was a thick green ledger with the park crest embossed in the corner, dates hand-lettered across the spine, 1996 to 2008. I found it open because that's what you do. Check what the last person wrote, even when last means 12 years before you were hired. Cedar Knob, unmanned as of October 12th, remove battery, said the final official entry. Below it, a line someone had added in pencil. Something's walking the tower legs after midnight. Don't look down when it does. No signature, no smiley face, just a sentence, grey and thin. I laughed. Not a big laugh, more a breath that tried to be a laugh and failed. People write things on tower logbooks, it's almost a ritual. I set my thermos beside it and went through the motions, crack the window east and west to taste the wind, sweep mouse droppings with a map folded into a pan, key my radio. Dispatch, Unit 14 at Cedar Knob. Cab secured, visibility good to Horizon Ridge, low ceilings to south. Stand by for overnight. Copy 14. Log hourly. Call if you get any returns on the west slope. Division A cleared a snag burn, but we don't like the barometer. Copy. There's a comfort to the way the tower night starts. You make your space yours on purpose. Stove in one corner for coffee, radio to your left elbow, binoculars somewhere your hand knows. You check the old wind-up clock because your phone doesn't like the cold. You find the light switch under the counter and click the bulbs off, so the cab is only the square of the map and the dark outside. The forest becomes a negative, the tower's reflection, your own face turned into glass. First hour, nothing. A squirrel scolded from the guy wire anchor like I was inconveniencing his commute. The river sent up little breath sounds where pressure ridges were shifting. The sky went from blue to steel. I keyed in for a routine check. Second hour, flurries, then stars. The ridge to the west wore a hat of cloud like an old man. I noted a faint column that might have been breath from a cabin chimney down at Cedar Marsh. I told myself it was nice, the way the dark let you sort the little lights. Third hour. The wind came around to the north, and the guy wires started to sing. A single tone at first, then overtones when a gust plucked them hard. So the whole tower was a bad guitar. I felt it through the soles of my boots. I wrote wires humming, barometer steady in the logbook because writing things down made them true. Fourth hour. The sound under the floor. Not wind, not mice. A creak, and then a drag. Like weight shifting careful on the stair. The kind of sound wood makes when it doesn't want to, but must. I told myself it was thermal contraction. Old lumber ticks when two temperature systems meet. Like an argument in a marriage no one will remember in the morning. I went to the trap door and put my hand on the bolt. It was cold enough to burn, so I left it. At the half, the radio coughed. N14, repeat that. I hadn't keyed the mic. I looked at the handset like it had grown a second mouth. The repeaters burp sometimes, skip from truckers, a weather station that hasn't been decommissioned correctly. I told myself it was one of those and reached for the transmit. Dispatch, Unit 14, no traffic. U-10-9? Silence. Just a soft breath of carrier tone, like the radio thinking about speaking. Then, a very faint. Unit 14, you're not alone. I froze. It was my own voice. Well, not exactly. The cadence was wrong, like hearing a recording of yourself from a room over. Close enough to raise a hair on your arms. I set the handset down on the map table like it was glass. I didn't answer. I told myself it was interference. One of the other rangers playing with tone generators. The mind will build a sensible house out of any scrap if it keeps the cold out. Something tapped the leg. Not the guy wires. The steel. A tap, tap, tap. Like gloved knuckles testing a beam. I moved without deciding to. One step, then another, towards the south window. The slope below was a dark erasure. My breath fogged the glass. Something pale crossed the strip of snow in the beam from my lantern. A long, thin shape that could have been a branch in wind, could have been a trick of my eyes, could have been how a person looks when weather and wrongness pull them into a different geometry. I felt my hands curl against the sill. I wrote in the logbook, wind shift, no confirmed smokes. because that's how you don't talk to the fear. You write things down. The clock said 1:40 when the second voice came on the radio. Not mine this time. Not dispatch. Dry as paper. Negs again. Don't look down. Static chewed the end of the sentence. It sounded like it came from inside the cab. I swung the light low towards the trapdoor, mad at myself for needing to. The bolt hadn't moved. Picking up the radio. Dispatch 14. I'm getting... I stopped. What? What was I getting? Possible interference on channel. Copy interference, the real dispatch said this time. The comfort of her breath between words. We've got repeaters piggybacked on BNet until 9. Weather is moving in heavy over Division C. You good up there? I'm good. Copy. Hourly at 2. Call if you see smoke. The wind sagged. The guy wires went quiet. I heard the tower instead. The steel uneasy at its own cold. The catwalk boards settling around their screws with little wooden sighs. I put my palm on the logbook without meaning to. The last entry in the book was said, remove battery. The pencil line below it said, don't look down. And the next page was blank. I flipped a few more, blank, blank. A coffee ring 3/4 of a circle, faint as a bad moon. A smudge where a thumb had paused. Nothing else there. I put my own thermos down and watched the condensation halo it made. The same 3/4 ring. And what? I said aloud. My voice in the empty cabin sounded like a radio too. It sounded like someone else was asking me not to lie. At 1:58 I wrote, no change. Wind light, no smoke. Almost felt like an oath. At 2:04, the logbook had a new line I didn't write. 2:04, no change. Wind light. Don't answer if it knocks. My pen was still in my hand. The ink of that line was the same blue as mine. I pressed my thumb to it. It was dry. The page smelt faintly like the air right before you pull a sweater over your head in the dark. I closed the book, opened it again. The line was still there. You learn out here that panic is a choreography. Heart first, gut next, breath last. If you can interrupt the sequence anywhere, you get to decide how the next minute goes. I set the pen down. I poured a coffee I didn't want. I counted the squares in the map east to west, north to south. Like a child counting floor tiles until the dark loses its shape. At 2:20, something knocked on the trapdoor. 3 slow, steady knocks. I didn't move. The old bolt had a flake of frost like a tongue. The knocking came again, and the third tap slid into a drag against the wood, like a fingertip thinking about tracing grain. The radio popped. Hourlies, 14. Dispatch, bored. The complicated mercy of boredom. No smokes, no traffic. I could hear my own tongue in my mouth. Copy. We like quiet. Get you off there by 9 if the front doesn't stall. I wanted to tell her about the pencil line. I wanted to tell her about how still can feel watched. Instead, I just said, copy 9, and watched my breath fog the window where my reflection's face should have been. It looked like the cab had eaten me from the shoulders up. Sometime after 3, the tower decided to pretend it was warm. I know that it isn't physics, but it's true. The air went soft around my ears. The smell in the cabin changed. The hint of mice and dust sinking underneath something sweeter, like sap burned and cooled and burned again. I felt lonely in my skin the way you feel lonely in a gym after close, the way echo feels when it wants your voice to be brave for it. I leaned on the counter because doing nothing is easier when you make a shape of it. When I stood again, the logbook was open to page 4 away from where I'd stopped. The top line was clean and in my hand. 3:11, hard breathing below deck. I ran my finger over breathing. I could feel the impression my pen didn't make. I flipped back to the page with "Don't answer if it knocks," then forward. There it was. 311, hard breathing below deck. Below it, another line in a shriveled pencil script I didn't recognize. 312. If you look down, you'll teach it your face. I slammed the book closed in a panic. I said things out loud, it didn't matter what. I named parts of the radio, the mic, handset, PTT, RX, TX. I named the countries we share mutual aid with. I named all the trailheads on the east side in order like a rosary. When you run out of gods, you count inventory. I didn't look down. It got colder again. You can feel that in your teeth. I thought the night had decided to be civilized when the ground below the tower gave a little, just a little, like something heavy took its hands off the stairs. At 3:30, the radio carried a voice that wasn't dispatch and wasn't mine. Younger, hurt, or embarrassed to be heard.
I can see you. Wave back.
My hand twitched. The window glass caught it and made me a ghost waving to myself.
Unit 14, copy.
Real dispatch again. Her rhythm reset my heart.
Sorry, we lost the repeater. B-net is a mess. You good?
I'm good, I lied. Visibility low, negative smokes.
Copy that.
By 4, the sky had that old paper colour you only get when clouds have walked away to find you. The valley begins to lift its head from the dark. The guy wires did their first tired chords. I told myself morning is just a tide that eventually takes everything. When I looked down, because of course I looked down, I did it by accident. Through the catwalk slap, not over the rail. My eye found the leg of where the tapping had been. The snow there was polished smooth, like hands had worked it. A little ring of bare earth showed where a boot should have scuffed months ago. There were no tracks coming or going, just the fact of a circle, the way ocean makes facts out of rocks. The logbook was open again, without me opening it. The time-stamped line waiting for me to read. 04:06. Sunlight won't fix it. Wait for wind. Okay, I said to no one. I waited. The wind came grudgingly, then generously. The tower sighed like a horse adopting your pace. The wires took up their song. When I keyed the radio for 4:30, my voice sounded like a person's voice and not an echo of one. Dispatch 14, no smokes, front lifting.
Copy 14, you'll have relief at 9. Division A requests you log any trespass lights if they pop. We've got some kids using sleds on the logging road.
Copy trespass. I made coffee. I didn't drink it. I poured it into the logbook instead, so the paper puckered and turned a sepia map of itself. That felt like defiance and relief. Something childish too. The coffee ran through the spine and stopped in a neat line like a photograph developing. The logbook blinked. That's not how paper works, I know, but it did. One page ahead went from blank to written as if a hand had passed over it that my eye couldn't keep up with. The letters were mine, the words weren't. 0612. Do not descend after dusk ever again. Dispatch 14. I keyed without thinking, then keyed off without speaking. I didn't want to ask a question that came out of the book. At 7, a line hung low in the east and pretended to be sun. The map table looked like a map of a different park, one where the rivers took their time and the towers weren't sticks but bones. I packed my things because leaving is another ritual. Move the cup, coil the forward, fold the map. I smoothed the logbook closed. Set it where I found it and put a split of cedar on top like a paperweight. The cedar smelt like the inside of old drawers. My boot was on the first step down when the radio spoke one last time, in my cadence that wasn't my cadence. Leave the book where it lives. I don't remember making the decision, only the shape of it. I took the cedar off the cover, tucked the logbook under my coat the way you smuggle a kitten from a barn you're not allowed to visit. I clipped to the rail and went down. The stairs felt longer than 32 feet. Every ricocheted breath on the steel felt like figure 8 knots slipping in a climber's hands. My boots hit snow. The circle under the leg was just a steel foot on frozen ground. The polished ring was a lie I chose not to investigate. The sky was daylight plain. The river was just water being itself in the winter. The map folded back into a map. At the rig I keyed dispatch. Unit 14, clearing sailor knob. No smokes, no trespass, log off tower ops.
Copy 14, return to station. Nice work.
Copy. The station smelled like coffee and wet dog and things with names. Chief asked how the view was. I said boring, because boring is the word you give in a night that took your breath and returned it in pieces. I took the logbook to my desk, and because cowardice is also a ritual, slid it into the bottom drawer under trail brochures and laminated maps. I meant to forget it. I didn't. Sometimes, on late shift, when the weather sits on the building like sleeping animal and the hall clock waits too long between ticks, the drawer gets cold. Not the whole drawer, just the inch of space where the logbook leans. If I open it then, the book will have moved to the top of the stack. If I open it again, it will be on my desk with my pen across it, and the page will be open to tonight. There will be a line in my handwriting that I haven't written yet. It will say something practical like 2309, siren test woke up the ravens. Or it will say something I can fit into paperwork. 0034, truck headlights on the wrong road. It never says anything like don't answer if it knocks anymore. Maybe the book learned my job. Maybe it learned I wouldn't. I still haven't told the chief. What would I say? Hey, the retired tower is keeping a second set of records that arranges itself when you look away. We all collect our own weird. Mine just fits in a drawer. The last time the logbook wrote ahead of me, it was Monday, and the kind of wind that scours sand from the stream beds. The line said 1842. Boy missing near Cedar Marsh. Calls for help aren't his. I didn't like it. I didn't like that at all. We did have a missing kid call at 1839. The boy was found before midnight, asleep under a canoe at a private camp. His voice on the radio when his mother held the mic was thin with cry. My log says, child located, A.O. clear. The Green Book's page stayed the way it was. You can say coincidence and be right. You can say my brain is sorting shapes into handwriting because it wants the world to keep being a map. You can say I should burn the book. I tried. The first match went out, the second hissed. On the third, I realized I didn't want to know what the logbook sounds like when it burns. I take the logbook back to Cedar Knob sometimes. On my days off, climb, unlock, set it on the sill. The tower looks like a harmless thing in daylight, a stick with a shack on it. I leave the book where it lived and sit on the floor with my thermos and listen to the guy wires practice a song they sing that night for some other shift in some other year. People ask rangers for our scary stories like we're vending machines. You want me to tell you that there's a cougar with a man's laugh, or a thing that walks like a man until snow teaches it otherwise, or a light that pretends to be a ranger truck and then isn't. Maybe those exist, maybe they're just wind in snags. I can tell you, there's a logbook in a tower that was supposed to be unmanned after 2008, that it kept watch anyway. I can tell you the person who wrote Don't Look Down had small handwriting and a pencil that didn't like the cold. I can tell you the sentence, leave the book where it lives, reads like a joke if you say it fast, and like a rule if you say it in the dark. Mostly, I can tell you this. There are nights in these forests where boring is a blessing. When your own voice on the radio is the only voice you should hear. When you let the wind have its song, and you keep your eyes where they belong. On the horizon, not the legs, not the trapdoor, not the blank page that wants to know what you'll write. If you ever find yourself in a tower in winter, and you feel the steel beam learn your weight, and you hear something polite knock when there isn't a neighbour, do the sensible thing. Log your hour, pour your coffee, wait for wind. And if the book reads itself, don't read ahead. Most nights on the backcountry patrol are boring. That's the truth people never believe. You check a few trailheads, you log the weather, maybe you ticket some teenagers who think closed for season is a dare. Boring means everyone goes home safe. This wasn't one of those nights. It was late September, end of the season, when most of the campgrounds up near Boundary Ridge were already shut. The water was too cold for canoeists, the bugs had gone, the rangers were down to a skeleton crew. I drew a swing shift because the gate camera flagged the light at the Hemlock Lake campground. A reflection of flame maybe, but from across the water. Could have been kids sneaking in, could have been a hunter ignoring closures. My job was to drive 10 miles of dirt road, check it out, log it, and get back before midnight. Hemlock's one of those campgrounds people either love or hate. 10 sites around a kettle lake, 2 pit toilets, a hand pump for water. In summer it smells like citronella and wood smoke. In fall, it's empty as a church on Tuesday. The lake sits down in a bowl of hills, so even a match looks bright from a ridge. That night the moon was thin and the water was flat as poured oil. I parked at the gate, grabbed my flashlight, and walked in. Half the sites were bare. Picnic tables tipped, fire rings cold. But when I got to site 7, the one right against the water, I stopped. The fire ring was still warm, not lit, no flame, no glow. But the ash had that baked look, like it had held heat not long ago. A 2-person tent stood 6 feet from the ring. No footprints around it, no tyre tracks on access road. The dirt was too firm for prints, but you learn to read scuff and pressure. And this site looked placed, not lived in. I keyed my radio. Dispatch, Unit 22 at Hemlock Lake. Got an active site, no permit on record. Fire ring warm, investigating.
Copy 22, no parties registered for Hemlock. Proceed with caution.
I walked the perimeter, call on the table, food still inside. A sleeve of crackers, a half jar of peanut butter, both fresh. Sleeping bags unrolled in the tent, neat, not slept in. The whole place felt staged. Then I saw the reflection. The lake was still as glass. In the water's surface, the fire ring glowed orange, flame licking at stones. I turned. The ring behind me was black and dead. I looked back down. In the reflection, the fire burned steady. My chest went tight. I've seen heat mirages, optical tricks, sure. But this wasn't a shimmer. This was fire where no fire burned. I walked to the edge, knees bending with the slope, and leaned closer. That's when I saw the tent. On shore, zipped shut, still as fabric gets in dead air. In the reflection, the flap hung open, sagging like something had just crawled through. I don't scare easily. I tell myself that anyway. I crouched, dipped my glove in the water to break the surface. Ripples spread, distorting the picture. When the ring settled, my reflection came back wrong. It was me, but delayed. A half second behind. I lifted my hand. The water hand lifted late. I leaned forward. The water me lagged. Then caught up too fast, like it wanted to meet my eyes. The radio hissed.
Unit 22, status?
I jerked back from the shore. My reflection didn't. It kept leaning forward, face close to the water, long enough for me to see the mouth open. Dispatch 22, active site, but no occupants. Continuing sweep. My voice shook. I hoped she didn't hear it. I zipped the tents, even though it was already zipped. I scattered the food into the bear box. Ranger habits. Keep order, control what you can. Then I was drawn back to the water. Now there were 2 figures in the reflection. Mine, standing still. And another, taller, pale against a tree line. Behind me the shore was empty. I spun, flashlight beam raking trunks and brush. Nothing but birch and spruce and the smell of cold water. My light cut back to the lake. The second figure was closer now, standing at the water-me's shoulder. I grabbed the mic. Dispatch. Confirm no other units near Hemlock tonight.
Affirmative 22. You're solo out there. Everything alright?
I stared at the glass surface. My reflection lifted its hand again, but not to match me. It lifted on its own. Palm open towards a tall figure. Copy. Solo. Will advise. I should have left then. I should have packed the tent, doused the ring, written the violation, and cleared out. But I couldn't look away. I crouched again. closer this time, until my boots sank in the damp soil. The water smell filled my nose, cold and mineral. I dipped my glove in again, just to prove control. I brought up a palm of lake water. Cold burned my skin. For some reason, I drank. Reflex, stupid ranger thing. Taste the water, know the source. When I swallowed, I looked down again. My reflection didn't. It still held the water in its hand, still staring at the surface, as if waiting for me to follow. I backed up fast, heart hammering. The ripples broke the picture. When it smoothed again, both figures were gone. Just me, just the trees, just the night. I logged the site as cleared. I wrote it neat, factual, no panic in the lines. Unpermitted use, site vacated, no persons present. Fire pit cold. I didn't note the reflection. By the time I reached the gates, the sky was quivering. Owls giving way to crows. My radio stayed dead quiet. At headquarters, I washed my hands in the sink, the way you do after field work. Water pooled around my fingers, clear under fluorescent lights. I should have seen my reflection. I should have seen soap bubbles catching skin. Instead, the basin showed the tent flap unzipping, the fire blooming, and two figures standing at the lake's edge, one with my face. I shut off the tap, the basin went empty. My hands dripped like nothing had changed. I haven't been back to Hemlock since. Other rangers cover it now. But sometimes, when I bend to tie my boots or lean over a coffee mug, the surface of the liquid ripples late. Not always, just enough. And once in the mirror at the station, I caught it plain. The reflection didn't match. It was still down there, kneeling by the water, waiting. People always ask me if wolves scare me. I tell them no, wolves belong here. When you hear them sing across a valley, it means the land is still wild enough to need them. What scares me is when the sound is wrong. This all happened in late December, when the park was bone quiet under snow. I've been assigned a 3-day backcountry patrol up near Cutbank Ridge, looking for illegal trap lines. We get them every winter. Snares strung along deer runs, bait pals set near logging cuts. Poachers haul out the animals on snowmobiles and sell the fur to whoever doesn't care how it's taken. It was the kind of cold that makes leather squeak. 15 below, dry air biting my nose raw. Pack straps stiff against my shoulders. My snowshoes creak like hinges with every step. Routine work. I like routine. You log the miles, check the drainages, and report what you find. Easy stuff. That afternoon, I found a wolf scat near the bend in the river trail, fresh, steam still curling off into the cold. I knelt. Poked with a stick out of habit, mostly herringbone, rabbit, probably. But the shards looked wrong, too large, like finger bones. I told myself they were squirrel femurs. I wrote it neat in my notebook. Wolf scat, fresh, probable hair. Close the book, keep walking. Towards dusk, the first howl came, long, rising, tapering off. The kind of sound that settles into your ribs. A second followed, quick, too quick. They overlapped, same pitch, same length, like an echo that didn't wait its turn. The hair on my neck went stiff. Wolves chorus in packs, sure, but their voices weave. These were identical. I keyed the radio. Unit 22, Cutbank Patrol, multiple wolves vocalizing, South Ridge. Static answered. Then a scrap of my own voice bled back through. Multiple wolves vocalizing, South Ridge. I froze. The repeater can burp sometimes, but it doesn't usually copy your own call word for word. I tried again. Dispatch, confirm readback. Silence. Just snow settling in the pines. I pushed on. The trail bent towards the ridge, where the timber thinned. That's where I found the tracks. At first they looked normal. Big, rounded wolf prints, 4 toes, claw marks faint. But after 20 yards, the pattern changed. The forepaws vanished. The high prints stretched long, deep, like something started running bipedal, leading 20 feet between impacts. Then, just as suddenly, the stride shortened. The forepaws returned, like the animal had dropped back onto all fours. I knelt, set my glove in the one print. My whole hand fit in with room to spare. I measured the stride with my pole. Too long, too heavy. The forest had gone dead quiet. No jays, no owls, not even the crack of a branch in the cold. That silence, the wrong kind, pressed against my ears. Then the crunch came. Snow compacting under weight, pacing me in the timber to my right. I stopped. It stopped. I moved. It moved. Always just out of sight, never rushing, never falling back. By dark, I'd had enough. Protocol said make camp and resume at first light. I cleared a pad in the snow, built a small fire, set my tent. The heat barely took the edge off. That's when the circling began. Footsteps in the snow. Slow. Deliberate. Right on the edge of the firelight. Never closer, never further. I sat with my back to the tent, rifle across my knees, counting each pass. 10 steps. 10 steps. At midnight, a howl split the air right above me. My fire spat sparks as if the sound had weight, then nothing. No more circling, just my own breath and the hiss of pine burning. I didn't sleep. By morning, the tracks circled my camp in a perfect ring. Not wolf tracks, not human. A mix, morphing from one to the other as if the snow couldn't decide what had passed. I packed fast, half frozen, and pushed for the ridge. The sky bruised purple with evening as I reached the cut line. I turned my headlamp on. The beam carved silver and black shapes out of the timber. That's when I saw the eyes. Wolves glow amber in the light. These were pale, almost white, shining too long. The shape stepped into the beam. Wolf-like at first, low, broad-shouldered, narrow head. Then it rose higher, taller than any wolf, taller than a man. Limbs too long, joints bending like it hadn't decided which way they belonged. Its muzzle gaped, but no breath steamed out. We stared at each other across 20 yards of snow. I forced myself to lift my notebook, tried to log what I saw like protocol demanded. My hand wouldn't write. The words wouldn't stay true. Then it leaned back, head tilting, not at me, but at the canopy, as if something else waited above us both. And in one smooth motion, it melted into the trees. No sound, no crunch of snow, just gone. I don't remember the next 2 miles, only the relief when the snow under me turned to a gravel plough line, and the beam of my truck's headlight cut the dark. I climbed in, locked the doors, and keyed the mic. Unit 22, clear. Negative wall sign, no trap lines, returning to station. While my voice sounded steady, it was a lie. I sat there with the heater blasting, trying to feel human again. When my fingers thawed, I noticed my boots were soaked through, leather dark with melt. I hadn't stepped in water, only snow. That's when I heard it. A soft shift above me, snow sliding off metal. I looked up through the windshield. Clean. The hood was clean. But on the roof of the truck, pressed deep into the crust, were paw prints. Not dog, not wolf, bigger, heavier, leading front to back, stopping right above where my head rested. I started the engine. I didn't look up again. I drove until pavement met lights, and lights meant I could stop pretending my own breath was enough company. I logged the patrol as uneventful, but sometimes that's what survival looks like. But even now, when winter settles on my truck, I find myself checking the roof before I drive, and praying the snow is clean. The truth is, most ranger nights are calm. No logbooks writing themselves, no strange figures in the water, no tracks that don't belong to wolf nor man. But every ranger has one night they don't forget. And they don't always tell those stories, not in official reports, not at the station. Sometimes not to each other. These are ones that have slipped through. Whether you believe them or not, remember this. Boring keeps you alive. And the rangers pray. Every shift stays boring. That concludes tonight's Ranger Stories. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like. It helps more people find these tales. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more long-form horror, folklore, and Ranger confessions. Make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. Until then, stay safe out there. And may your nights stay boring. The wilderness keeps its own secrets. Ask any ranger and they'll tell you that most nights are quiet. Just wind in the trees, animals moving through brush. The normal sounds of a living forest. But every so often, something slips through those cracks in the routine. Something they don't write down in the logbooks. These are the stories from those nights. The ones you won't find in training manuals or safety briefings. The kind of nights that remind you the forest is listening, and sometimes it answers back. The closure tape snapped back and forth all afternoon, a tired yellow tongue in the wind. Rockfall had chewed up a bite out of switchback 4 on the rim trail, so the gates went up and the public stayed out. My name went on the clipboard for a dusk sweep. Check the barricades, walk to the slide, make sure nobody ducked the rope for a sunset photo. The truck grumbled onto a dirt pullout and died quiet. Cold had crept in all day, the kind that sits in the shadow of stone and never leaves. I killed the overhead, stepped out into that thin iron smell you only get when dust has been lately wet, and then dried again. The sky held on to colour over the messes, soft bruise dripping pale gold. Everything below that line looked etched instead of alive. I keyed the handheld. Ranger 12 at North Rim closure. Starting sweep. Copy 12. Dispatch sounded far away and comfortable. You're the last one out. Don't make me send a rescue. Copy. A weak joke, but her voice lightened anyway. Gate chain, locked. Plastic sign about rockfall, straight. Someone had tugged the tape on the side path where old steps dive under scrub. I retied it, the knot bit my gloves and held. The trail spent a few hundred yards flirting with the rim before it gave up daylight and shouldered onto the notch. Rock, both sides, juniper clinging at angles that felt like lies. The first switchback curled under me and the world changed temperature by a handful of degrees. Warm day above, refrigerator below. The kind of drop that makes your head hurt. Boots on sand, boots on sandstone. Each noise went up and came back a beat later. Softer, rounded off. Canyon acoustics, you learn your own soundtrack when you work these routes. I kept the pace, steady, counting out steps in my head, the way I always do when the light is leaving. The slide showed itself grey powder thrown across orange slick rock like flour on cutting board. Fresh scar in the wall, shards. A boulder taking a nap in the trail where boulders don't belong. Somebody had already flagged the line with pink tape for maintenance in the morning. I took a few photos with the file, measured the block with my pole, logged the GPS and walked the edge to make sure nothing else was loose. A crow crossed the gap above, a black arrow against fading sky. The wind died. The absence of it felt like someone lifting a hand off your shoulder. That was when my steps started coming back wrong. Left, right, left. My toes touched down and a second set arrived a breath late. Not echo echo. Not slap and repeat. A copy with timing just off enough to make you notice. I stopped. The return didn't. One more pat landed where footfall would have gone if I'd taken another step. The radio breathed against my chest, the little speaker diaphragm moving with my own jacket as the voice in it couldn't decide to be born. I thumbed the button anyway, more for company than report. Ranger 12 at the slide, no movement, returning to gate. Copy. Comfort in a single word. The way out runs the same turns backward. Switchback 4, blocked. Chalk mark here, paint mark there. Switchback 3, bench where people sit when they shouldn't. I stopped there out of habit, to scrape a little trail water that always lives in a particular bowl of stone. Shallow puddle tonight, thin ice film threading itself into the corners. When the beam from my headlamp hit it, the service turned mirror. My face looked older than it had at noon. Footsteps again. Behind me now. Same distance, same weight. Same cadence a half beat late. Left, right, left. It matched me until I stopped, then gave me one more. Always the same last step that I hadn't taken. I've walked this place at dark 100 times. Certain sounds become familiar. Group with kids, echoes for days. Solo, steady. It's just you coming back thinner. I tried mundane at first because that's the only way anything ever stays ordinary. I clapped, a clean palm to palm. One return, soft. Another, softer. Nothing weird. I tested my boots, stomped down hard. The canyon threw one copy back exactly as it should. Then, I walked again, and the second set returned to its lag. Not matching, not free. Something in between. Fine. Maybe wind off the sidewall playing tricks. Maybe blood in my ears. Maybe the cold changing how cloth sounds. None of those passed the taste test either. But they were better than admitting I wanted to turn a light on when there isn't one. The slope under switchback 2 carries sand over stone in a thin sweep that always shows what passed. I angled the beam low and watched the grit come alive. My row of prints ran tidy along the inside edge. Behind them, in the looser sand, another set had formed. Same tread patterns as mine, same size, but each heel landed a hair late and a hair deeper. Like someone heavier by a few pounds had decided to wear my feet. I crouched and stuck a knuckle into it, cold, bit bone. The edges held fresh. You learn to read crumble. These walls kept secrets that don't lie about physics. Those weren't leftover hikers. Those weren't from yesterday. Those were now. Ranger 12, I said. My voice sounded normal. It took effort to make it so. Making my way out.
Copy 12.
The speaker in my chest kept me company. Somewhere far above, a jet drew a line I couldn't see. I told myself, finish the job, close the gate, get in the truck, drive. The last switchback carried me back into open cold, where sage starts again and the sky widens, and dust eats cameras. The light dropped the final bar towards night, and the first stars came out with all that old confidence they have when there's no town to compete with them. I was almost to the chain when the last step landed again. Just one. Right where my boot would have gone if I'd kept walking instead of looking back. I didn't look back. The padlock kissed chain. The sign faced the right way, taped tight. I squeezed the latch once to feel it give and hold, then crossed the lot to the truck. The cab light painted the inside like a cheap stage. The smell of sun-hot vinyl that lives there even in winter met me like a small dog. I tossed my pack in the back seat and hit the tailgate catch to throw my boots. The bed liner gleamed under the dome light, scuffed and familiar. 2 wet ovals darkened the rubber mat near the wheel well, just where I always plant my feet when I toss gear up. Another pair sat beside them, offset by a few inches. Same tread, same spacing. Same little nick in the heel where I dragged over basalt last week. Darkening, slow, the way water does when it sinks into cold plastic. My lamp found nothing on the fenders, no drip line, no splash. Just 4 prints where 2 should live. I closed the gate, nice and gentle, and sat behind the wheel without slamming the door. The key felt too small in my glove, heater fan on low, hands braced at 10 and 2. Not because anyone had taught me that, but because racing them gave them something useful to do. Dispatch. 12 is clear of North Rim. Gate secure, returning to District.
Copy 12. Good night.
Good night. The words felt like a dare the world makes every evening and rescinds for some people by morning. On the drive back, the canyon slid along beside me like a sleeping animal. Radio static cracked once and went quiet. The stars multiplied as I lost elevation. My headlights gathered rabbits out of nowhere and set them down again in their lives. The truck warmed enough to bring the second smell out. The one of old coffee in the cup holder and plastic rolling around that I never put away. I could have believed in only that truck if I'd asked myself too hard enough. Back at the station, the lights on in the window meant the kind of safety that has a coffee pot attached. I parked under the same old cottonwood that keeps dropping twigs across the hood as if it's personal. I left my boots in the bed for later. The prints would be gone by morning, I told myself. Evaporation erases everything that matters if you give it at night. Anything good? The evening duty officer leaned around the hall corner, pen stuck in his hair. Slides holding, tapes fine. My mouth stayed easy. Tomorrow gets a shovel and a bar, that's all. Boring is a blessing, he said, a little salute of the paper cup. Boring is king, I agreed. In the locker room, Tao held on to the day's heat. I habitually put my gear away in the same order each time because a trail is a trail even inside. Radio off and onto the charge cradle, notebook out of the pocket and into the second drawer, because otherwise I always forget it. Keys go on the hook with the chip paint spot. When routine holds, nothing in your head knocks. At the sink, I ran water until I lost the metallic taste. My reflection kept pace. Dark smudges under my eyes I hadn't named at noon. The thin white line at my temple from the time I misjudged a branch. The squint we all wear by year 3. No lag, no trick, just a face. The night shift's printer coughed in the admin room. I heard someone swear softly about paper jams. Good sounds, human sounds. I picked at a strip of dried mud on my sleeve, the colour of ruddy bread, and brought it to my tongue without thinking. Silt, not salt. The canyon had a way of getting into every crease. The radio rack clicked. Someone else signed on. Road Unit 38 asked for a license plate read by the campground. Dispatch gave it. A white noise stitched the rest of the sentence into something that sounded like nothing. I stayed where I was and let the water run longer than I should have. When I stepped back outside to load the truck with the cones I should have taken earlier from the storage cage, breath steamed. Mine, and only mine. The bed mat was dry, the 4 prints had lightened and disappeared, leaving no outline, no ring, no proof. I lifted one boot to check the tread and set it down again without remembering the shape I'd seen in the sands on the switchback too. Same Nick, same us. A screech owl called once from the cottonwood and shut up like it had remembered it was trying to keep its job secret. 2 dogs over on the private land to the north answered each other about nothing and then gave up too. The lights at the highway far below moved the way they always do, beyond your world, but proof one exists while you pretend you don't need it. In the morning, maintenance found another small slough of chromat with switchback 4, and a loose block waiting for a pry bar. Routine event, fixable task. They opened the trail 2 days later after a sky wash and a safety walk. People flowed in again with their noise and their shoes that aren't shoes and their tendencies to stand dangerously close to edges. The place looked like nothing had ever happened except what the park sign said. I never wrote the other part, not because I think it makes me special and not because I wanted to hold a secret. I didn't write about it because writing is a way of telling the thing that it can stay. I talked about the slide. I talked about spam text on the handheld that kept hitting my number even though dispatch promises they can't. I told a joke to the maintenance guy with a beard about his beard. We ate stale donuts in the break room and complained about hikers who talk like we're the ones lost. If you stand at that bench on switchback 3 and clap, the canyon sends you back a polite copy. If you stomp, the rock answers once and stops. That's how this place has always been. That's how it will be tomorrow when I walk it again and believe it. My job is to trust stone. Sometimes, though, last step lands where yours would have gone if you let it. If you're up there at dusk and you hear it, keep walking. Don't give the last move. Don't pause to see if it follows when you stop. Let the gate catch and give. Let the truck's cab light pretend it's enough sun to live by. Drive home heavy and make coffee you don't need and tell nobody. And if you do look into the bed and see dark ovals where there shouldn't be any, close the gate, nice and gentle. Put your key in the ignition with both hands, like you're teaching yourself a task from scratch. Think about nothing except miles. The canyon takes sounds and gives them back how it wants. It's not my place to argue with geology. I'm a name on a clipboard and a pair of prints in sand that blew flat by morning. I'll walk it again because that's what we do. Someone will stand where the bench lives and try to take a photo of themselves with the valley, and the light will make an ordinary day look holy. And I'll remind them to stay by the rail. They will, for 20 minutes. They'll forget because that's what people do. I'll tie the tape again when it loosens. Rocks will fall when they choose. If you ever walk a closed trail at last light and the air goes cold in a place it shouldn't, don't count your steps out loud. You don't need to share your rhythm with anything that listens. Lock the gate, turn the key, and go home. Dusk bled down the ridge while I walked the last sweep. Bow season had ended for the day at sunset. Anything after that in our boundary is trespass and a ticket. The lot at Laurel Gap was empty. No trucks, nose out on the gravel. No tire heat in the dust. Still, the air had that held breath feeling these woods wear when somebody's planning to be where they shouldn't. Leaves gleamed in the low light like oiled leather. Hemlock trunks took the last of the colour and swallowed it whole. I pulled the gate chain, checked the padlock, stepped over and started down the service path. The slope pitched quick into a hollow that keeps cold even in August. Tonight it felt close enough to touch with the inside of your mouth. Damp, metallic, the smell of leaf mould and creekstone. The handheld rode quiet on my chest. I called in anyway. Unit 22 at Laurel Gap, night sweep, no vehicles present. Copy 22, dispatch said, the radio making her sound like she was speaking from the inside of a jar. You're clear. Ping if you make contact. The first 100 yards drops you into a laurel so thick you learn to push with your forearm, not your hand. The path snakes around a blowdown that's been here for 2 winters. Every crew promises to cut it, and every crew forgets. I stopped at the scrape where the corn shows up sometimes. The ground here was churned to paste, kernels stamped into mud. Somebody had baited recently. Illegal, inside the park. I slid a small trail camera out of my pack, strapped it to the maple at knee height, angled it at the access line where boots would pass it if they came back to check their setup. Lens clean, sensor test blink, card seated. Time synced to my watch. All the boring parts that keep good evidence from being a story later. A rattle clacked up slope. Buck fight in miniature. Another antlerlet from the opposite side too fast to belong to 2 real deer that far apart. The sound died so neatly it felt cut with scissors. Poachers, I said to nobody. Saying it out loud moves the fear into a box with paperwork and fines. Humans I can handle. I stepped deeper into the hollow. The creek there is shallow and slow, only a couple of inches most days, but it carries sound like wire in the dark. A bleat call squealed once and quit. Ow, then nothing. He stood at the edge of sight where the laurel gives back to hardwood. Not a monster, just a deer. 8-point by the look. Neck thick with rut, body long. The headlamp on my cap sent a bar of light across the trunks. His eyes caught it and held, pupils blown wide, the usual green gold. He didn't blink. He didn't flag. He didn't do anything except watch. I angled the lamp down. I don't like to blind animals if I don't have to. makes them make bad choices. I clapped once, sharp. Hey, move on. He didn't. His ears didn't flick. Gnats hallowed the beam and drifted past his face like he was cut out of a picture and glued back in wrong. I stepped towards him, measured, not aggressive. He lifted a foreleg and placed it like a hand would place itself. Careful, deliberate, no scuff. The joint bent, not the way a deer's does, but as if the bones inside didn't agree on which direction to hinge. The motion crawled under my skin in a way I can't name, not fast, not threatening, just wrong. I pushed air slow out of my nose and let the hammer of my breath settle. Easy, I said. Out of habit more than to him. Another step. His head turned to follow, and kept turning. Deer have a range. You'll learn it without measuring. This turn moved past that by a tick. Chin never lifted to scent. Ears never set into that alert triangle. No steam from the muzzle, even though my own breath smoked in the cold. The muscles in his neck didn't ripple under the hide the way living animals readjust their own weight. It looked like someone had taught the body how to draw a deer, and the lesson hadn't stuck. Branches didn't crack behind him when he stepped away. Laurel didn't resist. He eased into it as if he had been made after the shrubs, and they'd given him room because they remembered. The rattle clicked again in the trees above me, the same pattern, note for note. I swung the lamp up instinctively. Bark, leaves, darkness. When I swung back, the buck stood closer. Same posture, same stillness. The distance gone without the space between accounted for. Not tonight, I said. Trails closed. He looked at me the way some people do in hospital, present with their face, absent in their eyes. Boot prints tell the story of a person's decision. Hoof prints tell the grounds. I angled the beam down the slope and searched for depressions. The leaf litter lay flat and undisturbed. No deep cuts where a deer that size would have stepped. No sharp splits where he would have pushed off. Just wet leaves trying to freeze around nothing. My hand found the mic on reflex. Dispatch, I may have 2 parties working illegal calls above Laurel Gap. No vehicles in lots. The words trailed off. I didn't want to say alone. It makes a thing in your head suddenly feel like it's been invited.
Copy 22. Anyone with you?
She asked anyway. Negative. I glanced back at the maple and the small square eye had been trapped there. The camera watched me without opinion. The red LED test blink had steadied to a heartbeat, armed. The buck tilted its head then. Not a deer tilt, a person's curious lean like trying to read small print. The angle sat too long and didn't move through transitions the way flesh should. A long jaw worked with no sound, no chew, no cloud of rhyme from breath on cold. The air between us tightened until it had weight. I didn't want to push my light into its eyes if I could help it, but this needed a push. I raised the beam, full into the face. The glow stayed. Not a flash of tapedom, and then blink and a shy turn, but a steady shine that looked like the light had been swallowed and was coming back through glass. His pupils didn't pinch. The beam tracked his head and the glow rode it like it lived there. Move on, I said. I brought my boot down hard, not towards him, towards the space between, a sound for him to choose against. But he didn't flinch. He didn't decide anything. He was a picture of a decision with the verbs missing. A twig snapped off to my left, a small believable sound. I turned out of pure instinct, but when I looked back, the buck was gone. Laurel stood where Laurel had always stood. Darkness held what it was supposed to hold. I don't like to be angry in the woods, but sometimes anger moves your legs where fear asks you to fold. I walked the contour and cut up towards the ridge where the poachers would have set their line. Nothing. No boot tracks, no cut branches, no faint smell of tobacco a lot of them carry without meaning to. The rattle stayed silent, the bleat called once, far off and wrong, too short and too clean. Then the hollow closed around the sound like it had been swallowed because the body it belonged to didn't want it anymore. I circled back. My boot slid on wet stone and caught. The creek's thin talk kept to itself. The camera's tiny eye glinted. I thumbed the strap in habit, made sure the housing was tight, and left it to do its job. The lot met me with the kind of cold it sits right behind your teeth. I called it in. Unit 22, clear at Laurel Gap. Bait out, no contact. We'll pull cam in the morning.
Copy 22. Good night.
Gravel turned to country blacktop. Blacktop turned to the washed out yellow of the two lanes that makes you pass the old gas station with the vulture that lives on the sign in the winter. My mind tried to make jokes about deer that you watch like doctors. I let it and didn't laugh. At HQ, the big room hummed like it always does after change of shift. Printers, coffee, someone telling you a story you're only supposed to half hear. I popped the camera housing and slid the card into the reader and set the folder to load. Infrared stills scrolled by. Empty trail, raccoon tail like a hand, me kneeling with a strap, me stepping back, headlamp bloom blowing out the front of the frame. Then a frame of just trees. Then me again, turned away writing in my notebook, the angle catching my shoulder, the notch on my cap, the little reflective strip on the mic cord. The next frame took an extra half second to draw. Software chugged, the picture resolved. Something stood where my back ended, close enough that if I leaned I would have touched hide. Deer from the neck up if you want to be lazy about saying it. Too long in the jaw, one ear set low as if it had been stapled on roll. The eye nearest to the lens carried the usual reflective boon, but the shape of it wasn't an animal eye in light. The circle looked too centered, like a person's pupil aiming through glass that hadn't been meant for it. The line of the neck held without muscle. The whole thing sat inches behind me like a costume borrowed and not understood. I leaned closer to the monitor to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. Pixelation didn't hide the posture. No hair grain, no whisker catch. The edge where shadows should have given depth went flat. The next frame was trees. The one after that was a blur of my arm as I moved. Nothing else stood there. Timestamp 18:37:52. The note in my book, camera placed, bait observed, rattle heard upslope. Carry that same minute and second plus 2 digits for temps that my watch doesn't keep. The red test blink I'd watched before arming must have lived between those frames like a heartbeat. I printed the still. The laser coughed and spit out the sheet with the image too dark by half. The eyes blown to white coins. The shape behind me more suggestion than proof. The stack never looks like on the screen. It's one of those small disappointments that helps you tell yourself stories later about why a thing doesn't matter. Anything good? The duty officer asked. Same way as always, half interested, mostly polite. Trash, I said. Raccoons with opinions, someone dumped corn, I'll go pull it tomorrow. Ticket? His pen hovered like hope. He likes paperwork, it makes his world stay linear. If they come back, I said. I could have walked it back out. I could have said the lens flared and made shapes. The infrared caught my shoulder and ghosted the rest. The angle made his antler base look wrong because I wanted it to. I like being right in boring ways. Boring means you did your job and drove home. But the printer page curled in my hand and the black circles that should have been eyes pinned me with the same polite, patient interest the buck had carried when he watched me without blinking. In the morning, I went for the camera. The corn had been pulled around by a raccoon and crow. No boot tracks, no fresh sign. The laurel, once again, did what laurel does. Looked like 1,000 hands reaching and none of them yours. I took the strap down, pocketed the card, and stood in the spot the picture said I'd shared. The feeling of a body behind me sat on my skin like a coat 2 sizes too big, and then went away when I turned. I logged the bait violation. I logged the lack of contact. I didn't log the still. Some things don't want their name in permanent ink. Some things don't need the help. If you work long enough where the ridges quilt together and hollows hold their own weather, you start collecting tiny rules that never make it into manuals. Don't trust a deer that holds still while gnats walk on its eyes. Don't follow a rattle that answers itself from two directions. Don't think it's kindness when an animal doesn't mind your light. Most nights, the only calls after hours are people who forgot the gate time and want us to wait. Most deer look like deer and move like deer, and vanish like deer when your foot brushes a stick. When that stops being true, go home. I still carry the print to this day. The paper is wrinkled now, the black's gone a little grey, the eye bloom less bright. If you hold it at arm's length and unfocus, it looks like a trick of the lens and a ranger with bad posture. If you put it too close, you smell the toner and forget what you're looking at. The camera recorded the body behind mine, not breath, not muscle. A shape that borrowed an outline and stood inside it like a kid in his father's coat. I don't ask for explanations anymore. I walk the lots at dusk and listen for corn in mud. I tie the gate chain and check my watch and tell people to come back tomorrow when the rules say it's their turn again. Sometimes a buck watches from the edge and I watch back. He twitches an ear, blows and leaves. And the small part of me that had been holding something up puts it down. And on the nights when a thing watches and doesn't move, and the world moves around it like it has more right to be still than I have to be anything, I finish the sweep. I keep the path in front of me, and I save the questions for long drive out where the station lights start looking like proof the map is real. The frame from 1837-52 lives in a folder that doesn't have a name. I don't show it to new hires. I don't tell them a rule about gnats and eyes until they find it themselves. If you're ever out here after hours and see a deer that stands too straight with a head that turns too far and doesn't blink at your light, don't teach it how close you'll let it stand. Write the ticket for the corn if there's corn, lock the gate, and keep moving. For 5 years, I was a fire lookout in the deepest parts of the Sierra Nevada. For 5 seasons, I lived in a glass box on stilts, 100 feet above a sea of pine and granite. In that time, I learned the language of the wilderness. I became fluent in its dialects of wind and water, in the grammar of its seasons. I knew the sharp, percussive snap of a pine branch giving way under a coat of ice. I knew the soft, almost apologetic rustle of deer moving through the manzanita at dusk. I knew the difference between the territorial screech of a great horned owl and the plaintive call of a spotted owl. My ears were my most trusted tool, more vital than binoculars, more reliable than the Osborne firefinder that sat like a bronze oracle at the center of my small, square world. I trusted my hearing implicitly. It was the bedrock of my sanity in that profound isolation. That was my mistake. And it was a mistake that would cost me everything. Because on the last night of my 5th and final season, I learned that the forest could lie, and every sound I heard that night was a lie. To understand the terror of that night, you have to understand the peace that came before it. You have to understand the profound, almost sacred silence of a fire lookout's life. People think it's a lonely job, and they're right, but there's a difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is a lack. Solitude is a presence. And up there, in Tower number 58 on a ridge whose name only appeared on topographical maps, I was never lonely. The solitude was a thick, comfortable blanket. My world was a 14 by 14 foot cabin, walled with glass, perched on a steel skeleton. Below me the world fell away in a dizzying cascade of green and grey. On a clear day I could see for 100 miles, from the jagged snow-dusted peaks of the minarets to the deep shadowed canyons that carved their way through the earth like ancient scars. My job, simply put, was to watch for smoke. It was a job of immense responsibility and immense boredom. 99% of the time nothing happened, but you had to be 100% vigilant for that 1% of the time that it did. My days fell into a rhythm dictated by the sun. I'd wake up before dawn, the air in the cabin crisp and cold. I'd make coffee on a small propane stove, the hiss of the gas and the percolating burble of water being the first man-made sounds of the day. As the sun's first rays hit the eastern peaks, I'd begin my first sweep. I'd stand on the catwalk, binoculars in hand, and slowly, methodically scan my quadrant. North to east, east to south, south to west, west to north. I'd look for the faintest wisp of white or grey that didn't belong. I'd note the weather conditions in my logbook: wind speed, direction, temperature, humidity. Then I'd radio in my morning report. Bald Mountain lookout to Sierra Dispatch, all clear, weather conditions as follows. It was a ritual, a prayer against the flame. The sounds of the day were a familiar symphony. The low hum of insects in the afternoon heat, the chattering of squirrels chasing each other up the trunks of the Jeffrey pines. The distant caw of a raven, its voice a stark black note against the blue sky. I learned to read the forest by these sounds. An agitated blue jay meant a predator was on the move, a bobcat maybe, or a coyote. A sudden silence in the insect chatter could mean a change in the weather. These sounds were data points, they were truth. The tower itself had its own voice. In a way, it was a living thing. On windy days, the steel frame would groan and sigh like an old man settling into a chair. The guy wires would hum, each with its own pitch. I knew the sound of the metal roof expanding in the midday sun and contracting in the cool of the evening. I knew the precise creak of the third step on the winding staircase and the rattle of the window panes when a storm rolled in. These were the sounds of my home. Predictable. Comforting. Night was when the true solitude began. The day shift animals went to sleep and the night shift took over. The symphony changed from the bright energy of the day into a more subdued, mysterious nocturne. The chirping of crickets would start up a steady pulse like the forest's resting heart rate. The frogs in the distant creek would begin their chorus, and then the predators. The yip and yowl of a coyote pack, their voices echoing off the canyon walls, always sounding closer than what they were. If I was lucky, I'd hear the deep, throaty hoot of an owl, a sound so low it was more of a feeling in your chest than something you actually heard. I loved the nights. The world would shrink into a small circle of light cast by my propane lamp. Outside, the universe would just open up. With no light pollution, the stars were a brilliant, overwhelming spectacle. The Milky Way was a thick, shimmering river of light. I'd spend hours just staring up at them, feeling both infinitely small and connected to everything. I was a professional. For 5 years in the tower, I had made me part of the mountain. I wasn't just observing the wilderness, I was a component of it. I wasn't prone to flights of fancy, I didn't believe in ghosts or monsters. The forest was governed by rules. A sound had a source. An effect had a cause. I'd investigated strange lights that turned out to be campers with powerful flashlights. I'd tracked down odd smells that were nothing more than a decomposing deer. I was a man of logic and observation. I had to be. My life and the life of the forest depended on it. The final night began like any other. It was late September, the tail end of the fire season. The air was getting sharp. Clean edge of autumn. The days were shorter, the nights were longer and colder. I was due to pack up and head down the mountain in 2 days. I was already dreaming of a hot shower, a meal I didn't have to cook myself, a conversation that wasn't spoken into a radio. I ate my dinner, canned stew heated on the stove, and watched the sunset paint the sky in strokes of orange and purple. I did my evening sweep, a final check before darkness fell. Nothing. The forest was calm, so I radioed in my final report. Bald Mountain to Sierra Dispatch. All clear. Signing off for the night unless there's activity. Copy that, Bald Mountain. Have a quiet one. We'll talk to you in the morning. Came the familiar stackety voice of the night dispatch. So I turned off the main radio, leaving only the emergency receiver, which was standard procedure. I lit my lamp and sat down with a well-worn paperback and a mug of tea. The wind was calm. The tower was silent except for the gentle hiss of the lamp. Outside, the crickets began their nightly song. Everything was exactly as it should be. The perfect, ordinary end to a perfect, ordinary day. But the first lie came at 9:17 p.m. I know the exact time because I just glanced at my watch. It was the sound of a footstep. It wasn't a loud sound, it was subtle, right on the edge of hearing. The distinct sound of a heavy, single boot landing on gravel. I'd spread a small patch of gravel at the base of the tower to keep the weeds down, and the sound was unmistakable. It had weight, intention. My first thought was a hiker. It was late, but not impossibly so. Sometimes people misjudge the trails and got caught up after dark. The tower was a beacon, so it wasn't uncommon for lost hikers to show up. I felt a familiar slight annoyance mixed with a sense of duty. I put my book down, walked to the north-facing window and shined my high-powered flashlight into the blackness. Nothing. The gravel patch was empty. The surrounding trees were still. No one was there. I scanned the tree line, moving the beam back and forth. No flicker of a headlamp. No hello? Shout up at the tower. I killed the light and just listened. The crickets were still chirping, but the wind was absent. There was no second footstep. I stood there for a full 5 minutes, listening. The silence was complete, broken only by the familiar sounds of the night. It must have been a rockfall, I told myself. Maybe a big pine cone heavy with sap. My mind, trained to find logical explanations, offered up a dozen possibilities, but none of them felt right. A rockfall clatters and tumbles, a pine cone thuds. This was the clean, deliberate sound of a footstep. The sound of weight being placed and then held. I shook my head. 5 years up here, maybe I was getting punchy, ready for the season to be over. Hearing things, it happens. The isolation can play tricks on your mind. The brain starts to create stimuli where there are none. I went back to my chair but couldn't focus on my book. Every sense was on high alert. I was listening, not just hearing, but intensely listening. The ordinary sounds of the night now seemed different, thinner. The silence between them felt deeper, heavier. An hour passed. The tension in my shoulders began to ease. It was a pine cone. Had to be. I was just tired. 2 more days. Then came the second lie. It was a bird call. Specifically, a Stella Jay. A loud, scolding, raucous call. Stella Jays are everywhere in the Sierras, but they are diurnal. They don't call out at 10:30 at night. They just don't. The call came from the west, close to the tower. It wasn't a single call. It was a frantic, agitated series of squawks, exactly like a jay that has spotted a threat. My blood ran cold. Again, I was at the window, peering into the darkness. Again, the sound was wrong. Fundamentally wrong. It was like seeing the sun rise in the west. My mind reeled, trying to find a rational box to put this in. Could an owl have spooked it? Possible, but unlikely to cause such a frantic outburst. Maybe a raccoon raiding its nest? Again, possible, but the sound of it was just off. It wasn't just that it happened at night. There was a quality to the sound itself, a strange metallic resonance. Like a recording played through a tin speaker. It was a perfect imitation of a Stella Jay's, but it lacked life. A flawless copy without a soul. The calls lasted for 30 seconds, then stopped, abruptly, not fading away, but cutting off like a switch was flipped. The silence that rushed back in was deafening. Even the crickets had stopped. The entire forest was holding its breath, and so was I. This was no pinecone. This was not my imagination. 2 anomalies, 2 violations of the natural law of this mountain in just over an hour. My heart hammered against my ribs. The comfortable solitude of my cabin was gone, replaced by a profound, encroaching dread. I was no longer alone, but I wasn't in the company of a lost hiker. I did something I hadn't done in years, not outside of a major storm. I went to the heavy trapdoor on the floor, the only way in or out, and I slid the heavy iron bolt across. It was a loud, definitive sound in the stillness, a clang of finality, a statement. You're not welcome here. I thought for a foolish moment that this might mean something, that it might signal my defiance. All it did was confirm to myself that I was terrified. I was now a prisoner in my own sanctuary. For the next hour, nothing. Just a heavy, pregnant silence that was worse than any noise. The crickets did not return. The forest remained unnervingly still. I sat in my chair, ramrod straight, straining to pass every molecule of sound. I didn't touch my book. I didn't drink my tea. I just waited, feeling like a watch spring being wound tighter and tighter. And then it started to deconstruct my world, piece by piece. It began with the wind. I heard it as a low moan from the north. I was relieved for a second. Wind was normal, but the moan grew. And it didn't sound like wind. It sounded like a low, sorrowful, human voice, humming a tune with no melody. I looked at the anemometer. The cups were perfectly still. There was no wind. The humming continued, circling the tower. It would fade, then grow louder as it came back around. A slow, deliberate patrol. It was inspecting my fortress. The sound was impossible. A sound without a cause. My logical mind began to crack. Then it started mimicking the tower itself. I heard the distinct creak of the third step on the staircase, but it was followed by silence. No fourth step, no second, just the third step, creaking once. A few minutes later, the sharp, metallic rattle of the latch on my supply box outside. Rattle, rattle, click. Then silence. It was toying with me. It was demonstrating its ability, turning the familiar, comforting sounds of my home into instruments of terror. It was telling me, I know this place. I know its sounds, and I can make them too. The psychological toll was immediate. I was in a glass box 100 feet in the air, completely exposed, and something was down there playing with me. A wave of paranoia so intense it was nauseating. I kept spinning around, looking out of each window, expecting to see what? I don't know. The training manuals on the psychological effects of prolonged isolation flashed in my mind. Hallucinations, paranoia. Was this it? Was my mind finally breaking? That thought was for a moment more terrifying than any external threat. The idea that my own brain was betraying me, but the sounds were too specific, too real. Then came the escalation. It started with the radio. I heard a burst of static from the emergency receiver. Not unusual, but then through static a voice began to form. Faint at first. Mountain to Sierra. Repeat. All over. It was my own voice. I froze. It had to be a recording, a freak atmospheric event, a radio wave bouncing back. It had to be. But then the voice came again, clearer. And it wasn't an old message. Sierra Dispatch, this is Bald Mountain Lookout. I think there's someone out here. Over. The voice was mine, the cadence, the tone, the slight hesitation, a perfect copy. But I hadn't said it. I was standing in the middle of the room, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. A new voice crackled in response. Bald Mountain, this is Dispatch. Please clarify. You have a visitor? Over. Affirmative, Dispatch. My own voice replied, chillingly calm. A visitor. I'm going to go and have a look. Over. Negative, Bald Mountain. Do not leave the tower. Acknowledge. Over. Dispatch's voice was sharp, urgent. A long pause. The static hissed. Then my voice came back, but it had changed. It was no longer coming from the radio. It was coming from directly below the trap door. It's okay, Sarah, it said in perfect conversational tone. I can handle it. The terror that seized me then is something I can't adequately describe. It was pure, primal fear. My own voice, my own identity, had been stolen and was now being worn by the thing in the darkness below me. I scrambled backwards, away from the trapdoor, staring at the bolted piece of wood on the floor as if it were the gate to hell. That bolt was my only shield, a flimsy piece of iron against a thing that could steal my voice from the air. Down below, it continued the conversation. A bizarre, one-sided performance. It would mimic my voice, then pause, then mimic dispatch. In my voice it said, Dispatch, the visitor appears to be unwell. I think I need to go down. Dispatch. Bald Mountain, I repeat, do not break protocol. Help is on the way. ETA is 3 hours. Can you see the individual? My voice replied, Negative, Dispatch. It's too dark. But I can hear them. They sound lost. It was a masterpiece of cruelty, using my own professionalism, my sense of duty as bait. It knew the protocols. It knew how to talk on the radio. It demonstrated an intelligence that was far more terrifying than any simple beast. That's when I remembered stories about skinwalkers, Navajo witches that can perfectly mimic a person's voice. A cold dread crept into my heart, the kind of fear from ancient stories, from things that walked the earth long before towers like mine. I backed away further, pressing myself into the corner, breathing in short, ragged gasps. My sanity was fraying, and then, suddenly, the performance stopped. Silence returned, thick and suffocating. I waited, my eyes glued to the trapdoor. And then, a new sound. Footsteps. Not on the gravel outside. On the staircase. Clang. 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 Slow, heavy, deliberate footsteps coming up the metal stairs. My mind screamed. The trap door is bolted, it can't get in, but the footsteps kept coming. Methodical, unhurried. Each metallic impact vibrated through the tower's legs and into the floor. A slow, climbing heartbeat of doom. Clang. Clang. It was taking its time, savouring this. It knew I was up here listening. It knew every step was another turn of the screw. It reached the top landing just outside the trap door. I heard the shuffle of heavy boots on the metal grate. Then a soft, gentle knock on the underside of the trap door. A polite, civilized sound. The kind the neighbour makes. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I was a statue carved from fear. A voice spoke, and the last of my sanity crumbled. It was my own voice, not the radio voice. It was right there on the other side of the door. "Hey," it whispered. "Let me in. I forgot my key." I clapped my hands over my mouth to stifle a scream. Tears streamed down my face. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. "Come on," my own voice cajoled, a hint of playful annoyance in its tone. "It's cold out here. Just open the door." It knew my voice so well. The little inflections, it wasn't just a mimic, it was a thief. When I didn't respond, the tone changed. The playfulness vanished, replaced by a cold, hard edge. "Open the door, now." The voice was flat, commanding. I stayed silent, huddled in the corner, shaking uncontrollably. A long pause. I could feel its presence just inches away, a weight against the very air in the cabin. Then it began to laugh. It started as my own laugh, a familiar chuckle, but it warped. The sound stretched, distorted, becoming deeper, rougher, until it was guttural, bestial sound that was not human at all. It was the sound of pure malice. The laugh went on, echoing in the cabin, a horrifying hybrid of the familiar and the monstrous. Then its final assault began. Auditory chaos. It was a cacophony of lies. The sound of 1,000 birds screaming at the wrong pitch, the howl of a wolf that dissolved into the screech of twisting metal. The sound of a roaring forest fire, so real I could almost smell the smoke, but there was no glow outside my window. The sound of hammering rain against the roof, but the stars were still visible. It layered sounds. The frantic squawking of the jay returned, interwoven with the sound of a woman crying my name. Then it would morph into the sound of crackling ice, of a tree splitting, of rocks grinding together. It played back every sound I had ever heard in that forest, but all of them were wrong. Discordant, nightmarish parodies. It was a symphony of every fear a lookout could have: fire, storm, structural collapse. It was a targeted psychological assault. It was trying to shatter my perception of reality so completely that I would throw open the door just to make it stop. I curled into a ball on the floor, hands clamped over my ears, but it was useless. The vibrations were coming through the floor, through the bones of the tower. I squeezed my eyes shut and rocked back and forth, whimpering. The world was nothing but a tidal wave of sonic horror. It felt like it went on for hours. My mind retreated to a small, dark place, a tiny kernel of consciousness that just endured. The professional lookout was gone. All that was left was a terrified animal waiting for the predator to strike. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence was not a relief, it was the climax. This was not the gentle, living silence of the forest. This was a dead silence. An absolute, vacuum-packed void. The cacophony had been a physical assault, but this silence was a metaphysical one. It was the sound of a world that had been turned off. The crickets did not return, the wind did not stir. It was the most unnatural thing I have ever experienced. My own breathing sounded like a hurricane. The frantic thumping of my heart was a war drum. I cautiously took my hands away from my ears. The silence pressed in, heavy and suffocating. It had a presence, a weight. I knew with certainty that transcended logic that it was still there. Right outside the trapdoor, it had stopped the noise because the noise was no longer necessary. It had demonstrated its power. Now it was just waiting. The silence was the final turn of the screw. The sound of a predator that had cornered its prey and now simply enjoying the final moments of terror. I lay on the floor, paralyzed, for what could have been minutes or hours. Time had lost meaning. My universe was the cabin and the crushing weight of the silence outside. My eyes locked on the bolted trapdoor, imagining a single unblinking eye peering through the cracks. My mind had started to shut down, the terror subsiding into a numb, disassociative state. I felt a strange resignation. This is how it ends, I thought, eaten by a sound. Slowly, agonizingly, the sky began to change from black to a deep bruised purple. Dawn was coming in, and with the first hint of light came the first true sound. A bird. A single, clear, piping note from a hermit thrush. It was the most beautiful sound I have ever heard. It was real, honest. A creature of flesh and blood singing to the rising sun. As if that note had broken a spell, the world began to turn back on. Another bird joined in. I heard the faint whisper of the real wind in the pines. The world was being rebuilt, sound by sound. The silence didn't break. It dissolved, evaporating like a bad dream. I remained on the floor until the sun was fully up, its light flooding the cabin. With trembling limbs, I pushed myself up. I was stiff, sore, utterly drained. I felt ancient. I walked to the trapdoor, my heart still pounding, and stared at the bolt. My hand shook as I drew it back. The sound was loud, obscene in the memory of the night's silence. I lifted the trapdoor. Cool air wafted up, smelling of pine and damp earth. I looked down the staircase. Empty. I descended, my feet unsteady. I checked every step, every landing. Nothing. I stepped onto the gravel patch at the bottom. It was undisturbed. No footprints but my own from the day before. No sign that anything had been there. It was as if the entire night had been a hallucination. A fever dream brought on by solitude and exhaustion. But I knew it wasn't. I knew because of the silence. And I knew because of the single thing I found at the base of the tower. Lying in the center of the gravel was a single black feather. A raven's feather. The quill was snapped cleanly in half, as if by design. A marker. A message? A calling card. The sight of that feather so black against the grey gravel confirmed the reality of the night in a way no footprint could. I didn't pack. I didn't radio my morning report. I left my book, my mug, my logbook, everything. I walked to my truck, got in, and drove away. I didn't look back. I drove for 6 hours, all the way to the city, the radio off, the windows up, in the silence of my own making. I never went back. That was 15 years ago. I live in a city now, a place full of human noise, cars, sirens, music, chatter. I surround myself with it. I can't stand the quiet. The silence is where the memory of that unnatural stillness waits for me. I never told anyone the full story. Who would believe me? They'd say it was the isolation. A breakdown? Maybe it was. Maybe my mind simply broke under the strain of that profound solitude and fabricated a monster out of sound. I've told myself that 1,000 times, but I don't believe it. The experience broke something in me. It broke my trust in my own senses. My hearing, once my greatest asset, is now a source of constant anxiety. A floorboard creaks upstairs, and my first thought isn't my neighbour's home. It's a flicker of that old terror. I hear a stranger laugh on the street, and if it even sounds remotely like my own, a cold dread washes over me. I can no longer listen to the wind without hearing a voice in it. I can no longer appreciate a bird's song without my brain analysing it, checking it for the soulless quality of a copy. Every sound is suspect. Every silence is a threat. We build our reality on the assumption that sounds are true. The footstep of a loved one, the whisper of the wind, your own voice in an empty room. But what if they're not? What if there are things out there, in the deep, quiet places of the world, that have learnt to lie? What do you do when you can no longer believe what you hear? I don't have the answers. I only have the memory of that night and a question that has followed me ever since. If it could mimic the forest and my voice with such perfection, what other voices has it learned, and who is it talking to now? If you've made it this far, thanks for listening. These accounts, whether you call them stories, confessions, or warnings, come from the edges of what rangers can explain. If you want to hear more from the dark corners of the wilderness, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, and leave a comment, and share your own experiences. Until next time, stay safe out there, and may the silence of the forest stay just that, silence. Deep in the winter forests, the cold keeps its own secrets. Rangers are trained to track storms, to log wildlife, to measure the weight of snow. But some things can't be logged in a report. Some things follow you back, in silence, in smell, in voices you were never meant to hear. Tonight you'll hear 3 accounts from those who walked too far into the north and came back with memories they'll never set down in the official books. These are the Wendigo Ranger stories, told as they were remembered and never forgotten. Late winter is when the range goes quiet enough for you to hear your own pulse in the hood of your jacket. Tourism thins to nothing, access to roads glaze over, and every mile becomes math. A slope angle, aspect, wind loading, snowpack history. My winter patrol covered 3 avalanche paths above a decommissioned service road. Start zones cut into north-facing barrels. Runouts that fanned into the timber. We kept 2 buried training beacons out there. Little electronic lungs set to transmit at 457 kHz. The international standards, so new rangers and the SAR team could practice with transceivers, probes, and shovels when the weather cooperated. The routine was comfort. Morning forecast from the centre, moderate trending, considerable on north and east aspects above the tree line. Wind slabs over a persistent weak layer of facets from December's cold snap. So I wrote down the numbers. Air temp, minus 12 degrees Celsius at 0700. Wind, northeast, 18, gusting 28. Sky, 1/8 overcast, no precip. I skinned up the road, ducked into the trees where a flagged corridor took over, and logged what the snow told me. Hand shears, a quick ECT, extended the column test, in a protective glade. The slab failed at 12 taps. Q2, planar, on a crossed facet, sandwich 8 inches down. It wasn't the kind of thing that kills a whole party, but it was the kind of thing that takes your feet out from under you on the wrong roll. By mid-afternoon, I'd confirmed both buried training beacons, Unit A and Unit B, were where we'd planted them in early January. One in the sheltered meadow near the old warming hut site. One higher, under a windrow in Bowl 2 runout. Batteries checked, housings dry, burial depths logged 70 to 80 centimeters. I flipped my transceiver to search, walked a grid, got clean arrows and consistent distances to both. Good enough to write winter by. Back at the tiny cinderblock station, the evening settled into its particular kind of silence. The baseboard crackle, the low hum from the repeater rack, the smell of wet wool and instant coffee. The forecast printer spit out tomorrow's advisory. I thumbtacked it on the corkboard and let the board shrink to map squares, pencil lines, and the reassuring blink of the radio's green LED. I slept like the avalanche dogs, one ear up, the rest of me pretending. At 0143, the alert cut through the station like it had teeth. Not a phone, not a repeater. A thin, insistent chirp from the shelf where we keep specialist units on charge. Transceivers set to receive only overnight. One of them was picking up a live 457 signal. I sat up, heart 2 beats ahead of the rest of me, and stared across the room at the row of yellow and orange shells. A single LCD arrow blinked on the nearest unit. Distance, 38 meters. Direction, out there, through concrete, through weather, as if the snow beyond the wall had started talking. I checked the log. No team scheduled for night training, no missing persons call on the repeater. The station door was deadbolted, and boot tracks in the snow ended at my own. The road outside had the particular hush of a strong cold. Chalk it up to ghost signal, bad reflection off the tower, interference of metal shelves. I thumbed the power off, waited, and thumbed on. The arrow came back, steady. Distance 37 meters, it was moving. I pulled on pants, beacon harnessed, shell. I left a note on the blotter, took the lightest pack, probe, shovel, spare gloves, 1 Rico reflector in case a rescue bird decided to fly, which it wouldn't. Not at minus 12 and no moon. I flipped the transceiver to search, stepped into the dark, and the station door sighed shut like it was tired of my decisions. The air had that crystalline bite that makes your teeth feel like they're humming. Snow squeaked under boots, a cold squeak, the kind you hear at a certain number and know without looking. The arrow pointed into the trees. Distance, 34, 30, 28 meters. It felt like following a heartbeat you didn't own. Unit A lived in the meadow. Unit B downslope in the bowl 2 runout. The arrow wasn't running to either line. It drifted oblique across contour towards a small roll where the forest breaks and the drainage braids. Not a place we buried training beacons, too many gullies, too much of a chance of water moving under the skin. The slope held its breath while my probe stitched the surface. 40 centimeters, 60, 90. Hollow at a meter. Not weak snow, hollow. A particular give, like a drum with a bad patch. I knelt, pulled gloves with my teeth, and scooped a gloveful off. Under the top crust, a void had formed. Air, not from sun crust sublimation or wind scour, but from the space where the snow should be. I pressed 2 fingers against the sidewall and felt the faintest current, as if the hill itself had drawn in a breath and was deciding whether to keep it. The transceiver now had 3.6 meters. No arrow. You're here territory. I built the pit like it mattered. Shovel slice, block out, toss in a clean fan. At 70 centimeters, my blade slid into nothing. Heat rose like a thought the snow couldn't quite hold on to. The void was the size of a sleeping bag, maybe bigger, and it didn't collapse when I undermined it. Vapor from my breath drifted sideways, pulled into the hole. The beacon arrow danced and gave me 2.5 meters, then 5.3, then 1.8 in an impossible sequence, like someone yanking the transmitter through space faster than my fingers. My probe dropped into the cavity with the softest tick. Nothing solid, nothing mechanical, just air where winter should be. I filled the pit back in, layer by layer, like closing a book. Sleep turned to the kind that watches you sleep. At 2:17 a.m. the shelf chirped again. Distance 42 meters. Same bearing, then a kink, then 50 meters. It was travelling down slope in little lunges, stopping, lunging again. I mapped the points on the wall, top of grease pencil scratches zigzagging from the meadow line towards the bowl 2 apron. No tracks under the moon, no wind to push snowmobile enough to fake it. Air still, sky black, range sleeping like stone. In the morning, I dug standardized pits, one in the meadow, one in the apron above the trees, shears that felt honest. Slab over facets on the shady side, stiffer than I'd like, but not a death sentence if you manage your angle and don't cut anything big. I verified Unit A and Unit B, solid, in their graves by my own hands weeks ago, alive and boring. That night, brought the chirp at 1:08 a.m, distance 61 meters. The track on the wall map traced a rational path, the kind a tired person takes in low light, aiming for the path of least resistance without knowing why. The arrow led me to a bend in the trees where summer runoff had undercut the bank and left a lip. I probed, dug, found another void. The sidewall bled a faint warmth. Smell in the air was cold, clean, with a thin coin taste under it that made the root of my tongue ache. I radioed the district in the morning, not as a ghost story, as a data point. We've got a Force 457 moving at night between the meadow and bowl 2, not a training unit. Unknown source. Behavior looks like a transmitter being carried. Carried by what? Ops asked, halfway to a laugh that didn't land. Unknown, I said. Behavior is consistent with movements in starts and stops, holes in the pack each night. No sign in daylight. Weather's clean tomorrow, Ops said the way a man says, prove it or drop it. Take one more night, then pull the training beacons if you think they're compromised. Compromised. Good word. It covers everything and admits nothing. At 2350, I was already in boots. I left a line on the blotter with coordinates and bearings. The arrow broke the shelf at 0017. Distance, 28 meters, then 23, then 19. It was closer to the station than any night prior. I stepped out under a low pressure of stars and fell in behind the tone. The beep of the transceiver in search is meant to soothe you. Soft pulse, consistent, encouraging, like the world wants to be found. The beeps stacked on top of each other now, out of phase, as if we're 2 units talking and neither would let the other finish a sentence. The arrow ran me along the shoulder of the drainage. I climbed through small firs too crowded to belong and broke into bowl 2's apron. flat white field under a slope that rises so cleanly it feels like a drawing teaching you the letter A. The beam of my headlamp failed to find any texture on the face above. Somewhere in that black, cornice it slept. I stood on the run out, not the start zone, but the line of consequence runs through both. Distance, 12 meters. I probed. The probe rattled against space under the slab. I shoveled fast, clean, blocks over my shoulder, fan out where the apron wouldn't load. The pit wall polished under the blade. At 80 centimeters, my shovel hit air again. Heat licked my wrist like a breath out of a cave. The void extended laterally, bigger than the others. When I leaned, the walls cold ghosted into my jacket. No sound, no snow creep or settlement noise, no small talk from crystals adjusting to their new neighbours. Just a sense that something had been and was not now, like picking up a warm cup that should be cold. The transceiver read 0.7 meters, then 0.4, then 3.1 off my right hip, always just out of reach. I set the beacon on the lip of the pit so its arrow pointed where it wanted me, and for one breath it aimed dead center. Then it skittered sideways, arrow to the trees, 6.5, 8.2, whatever it was, it moved when I moved. My breath made a cloud that flattened strangely as it drifted towards the cavity, pulled by a pressure my skin didn't register. For a half second the pit exhaled, barely visible, a curl in the headlamp beam, warmer vapour rising from somewhere the shovel had not cut. I backfilled, slow, careful, quiet, the way a man puts a sleeping child back in a crib. The arrow led me along the apron to the far edge where bowl 2 pinches into the trees. The slope above steeped into the kind of pitch that reads 38 to 42 degrees even if you never carried an inclinometer. The face had loaded from 2 days of east wind. A chalky wind slab sat polished under the headlamp, tight and ready to be told a reason. Distance, 10 meters, 9.5, 9. The tone turned into a near constant whine that lived somewhere behind the ears. The beacon jittered between 9.0 and 3.0 like it knew what I wanted and wanted to refuse it. I knelt and brushed the surface with the glove. No crackling, no hollow thrum. A good skin of stiff slab over whatever December had left me. The probe sank through 60 centimeters of chalk and then 20 of older, softer snow. Then halted on something that was not ground. Not tree, not rock, not wood. A firmness like hide pulled over the framework, with a give of stretched fabric. Every nerve in my forearm told me not to push. I pushed. The probe went through and found nothing. The resistance had been the skin over cavity. Air again, bigger room this time. The slope above me made one small settling sound, the kind you hear before the big sound. A tactile whomp punched through my knees into the earth. The slab under me didn't go. The slab to my left settled an inch, then decided to remember how to be still. I held breath I didn't need to hold. The beacon on my chest chirped and then screamed, not on search, but on send. My unit had switched itself, the LCD threw my own ID code back at me. 3 digits I knew from annual checks, rolling across the screen as if the device were inside a test jig, not attached to the front of my body. I stared at the send icon, thumb on the mode button, and it didn't care. It broadcast again, over me, through me. Something in the buried dark using my harness as a mouth. The tone that goes out in a rescue, ping, pause, ping. Left my chest without my permission and came back from the hill in perfect rhythm. The hill had learned a word and was saying it. Down slope, snow cracked in a thin Z. A piece of slab shuffled, cut loose, ran 10 feet and stopped, unhappy. Not the big one, a test, an arm flex. Distance on the receiver flashed 2.1, then 1.9, then 2.5 to my right as if something sidled beneath me, tasting where the weight was. I stepped back into the apron's safer angle, eyes blind to everything but the LCD and the face of snow above that had decided to be a face. My thigh hit the small fur behind me and shook down a rattle of ice from its needles. The ice hit the surface and didn't bounce, it sank, not into powder, but into pores where slabs shouldn't breathe. The hill took it. Base, I said, finally remembering radios were a thing. Ranger 4 at bowl 2 apron. Possible false 457 in motion under slab, slope primed. The repeater clipped the first 2 words and fed me my own voice back half a second late. Not mimicry, latency, electronics, but with the other tone chiming through bone and snow and cartilage. it all braided into one rope that I did not want to hold. I eased backwards 2 more steps, then turned and walked out, head down, careful, pretending it's what I meant to do. The beacon stopped transmitting from my chest. The icon flipped itself to search by itself as if nothing had happened. Distance numbers went blank for a heartbeat, then returned with an arrow pointing upslope and 7.3 meters. Whatever had borrowed the frequency let go. Morning was clean, blue, sterilized new gloves. I flagged the apron with bamboo and a high-vis streamer, wrote no travel, instability, in block letters that looked too cheerful, and filed a hazard report with coordinates, slope angle, aspect, and a narrative that used words like artifact, interference, and transient anomaly because there aren't boxes for anything else. Ops grounded training at Bowl 2 and sent me with a partner to pull Unit B. We dug it up from its grave at 78 centimeters exactly where my note said, wrapped in its dry bag like a patient in a vacuum pack. The battery test chirped green, housing clean. Nothing to tell you it ever spoke at night. Back at the station, I put my own transceiver on the bench and plugged it into the diagnostic cradle. The data dump printed a strip of ghosts, timestamped logs of sends and receives from the last 72 hours. At 0031, send, my ID, duration 3 seconds. At 0002, send, my ID, duration 4 seconds. A cluster of them, neatly spaced, right when I stood on the apron with my thumb on the button and didn't press. Ops looked at the strip, looked at me, looked at the strip again like it could be talked into truth. Could be a stuck switch, he said. Could be. We sent my unit to the shop. I took a loaner that smelled like the last man to wear it didn't believe sweat was a thing that evaporates. The night we pulled Unit B, the shelf chirped again, distance 112 meters. Bearing not to the bowls, but to the road. The ploughed, public, dull ribbon that winds through the valley and spits tourists into town with diners and a hardware store that sells more pellets the day it was January. I went far out enough to know that I didn't want to go farther. The arrow pointed down the corridor. I stood under the stairs, listened to the small sounds a forest makes when it pretends it never made other sounds, and turned back. The diagnostics log in the morning didn't clear anything up. A single send entry at 312. My ID, duration, 1 second. While my new loaner unit sat powered off on the hook by the door, Ops circled it in red and wrote cradle glitch in the margin. A week later, patrol from the next district over called to ask if we'd been running any after-hours training uptown. Their avalanche beacon checker at the roadside turnout had chirped for 20 minutes just after 2 a.m. Might be a pocket of weird reflections, I said, and tried to keep my voice in the neighborhood of average. We replaced both training units with fresh beacons and buried them in new holes far from Bowl 2. We stripped the old cache down to wood and left the meadow to its rabbit tracks of wind. When the forecast went high with a storm cycle, the bowls cleaned themselves in one afternoon, broad crowns, neat debris fans. All the energy spilled out like a body after a scream. We waited out the cycle and then skinned back up to assess. The apron where my probe found the knocked ground felt heavier underfoot, like a man who stands where he saw his house burn. I've kept the diagnostic strip in my inside pocket. Ink on thin paper. 3 black rectangles labelled with my code where no rectangle should be. If you look fast, it's electronics. If you look slow, it's a map of a mouth forming a word. We can call it interference, groundbouts, multi-path reflections of ice lenses, a stack of rational things. We can call it a trick of a tired brain late at night in a winter that went on too long. We can call it a story we tell each other so that we keep going back out under the headlamps to where the slab tightens and breath holds. But the snow remembers shapes we don't. The range keeps the paths it likes. Something learned a signal we teach to rookies and rescue dogs and people who don't want to die under white. It learned enough to move with it. It learned enough to borrow my mouth for a minute. I still carry a transceiver any time I step off a road in winter. On search, it's a compass. On send, it's a confession. When it chirps now, even on a benign training day, I feel the sound in the bones of my wrist the way you would feel a word you don't understand and will never learn to pronounce. If you hear a beacon at night where none should be, you can follow it if you can't help yourself. You can dig a clean pit, make tidy blocks, and put them back like you never touched the page. Or you can do what the old timers do and let the hill keep its noises. I file the forms and drink coffee and check the batteries. I tell the loaner unit goodnight out loud sometimes because the routine keeps the shape of a day intact. And when the shelf chirps in the small hours and arrow points away from the bowls towards the highways and radios and diners and houses with pellet stoves that tick themselves cool after midnight, I let myself picture the runouts that don't end at timber. The sound gets where it's going, one way or another. I got sent north on a call nobody else wanted. Late January, cold enough that spit would freeze before it hit the ground. They told me it was routine. A check on the old patrol cabin up along Ridgeway Road. Hunters had reported lights out there 2 nights in a row and nobody was supposed to be using it. Headquarters figured maybe squatters, maybe kids, maybe nothing. The road isn't even really a road anymore, just a snow-choked line through black spruce and jack pine, rutted and drifted, ploughed maybe once a year if that. My truck could only make it so far before the drifts ate the tyres. I parked, locked the rifle in the rack and strapped on snowshoes for the last 3 miles in. The forest was dead quiet, but not peaceful quiet. Almost wrong. You get used to the normal sounds, chickadees buzzing, squirrels skittering, branches creaking under snow, but this wasn't the same. This was heavy. Like every living thing had packed up and gone. Half a mile from the cabin, I found tracks cutting across the road. Not moose, not wolf, longer. The gait was strange, dragging almost, with deep punctures where weight pressed down. At first I thought snowshoes, but no snowshoe leaves holes that narrow or strides that wide. I crouched down, glove against the edge of one, and the print swallowed half of my arm. I told myself it was ice melt, distortion, anything. You start telling yourself stories before the real facts start getting into play. By the time I reached the cabin ridge, the sun was bleeding out fast. Up here, twilight doesn't last long. You get a minute of bruised purple sky and then it's just black. The patrol cabin sat hunched against a strand of spruce, tin chimney bent, shutters iced over. From the tree line I could already see the porch. Snow was scattered like something heavy had paced back and forth for hours. I stopped and keyed my radio. Patrol 7 to base, at sight, signs of disturbance, going in. Static answered. I tried again, same thing, no voice, no acknowledgement, just static, thick as wool. That's when the smell hit, copper, sharp, like a coin rubbed between your teeth. It burned in the back of my throat and the air felt heavier for it. I adjusted the strap on the rifle, crunched across the snow and climbed the porch. The door latch was bent, not broken, bent upward like something too strong and too clumsy had tried to figure it out. I drew a breath, pushed the door, and stepped inside. The cabin smelled like damp wood and mouse droppings. Normal enough, but laid under it was the same copper tang, faint but sharp enough to sting the sinuses. The lantern by the door was gone, and the logbook that should have been on the table was lying open on the floor, pages bent like something had rifled through them with wet hands. I swung the door shut and tested the latch. It wouldn't hold. Metal warped too far. I shoved a chair under the handle instead. An old trick, but good enough for raccoons, maybe people. Definitely wouldn't stop anything that could bend metal barehanded. I swept the room with my flashlight. Bunks against the wall. Stove still cold. Wood stacked neatly in the corner. Everything ordinary but off, like the place had been staged to look empty after someone left in a hurry. I radioed again. Patrol 7 to base, inside cabin, logbook disturbed, no contact. The static hissed back and then another voice broke through. It wasn't dispatched, it wasn't anyone I knew, just my own call sign, repeated in a flat, broken tone.
Patrol 7. Patrol 7. Patrol 7.
The voice had no weight behind it, no breath, like a tape loop stuck on repeat. My thumb froze on the transmit key. I didn't answer. The voice kept going, dragging my number out longer each time. Finally it stopped, cut clean like a switch flipped. The static roared back and then silence. I killed the radio and set it down. My skin crawled. The stove had a few unburned logs inside, like someone had stacked them but never struck a match. I lit it, but the heat wasn't comfort, it was survival. With snow deep as it was, no way I'd make it back to the truck before dark. I'd hold up here, ride the night, and head back at first light. That was the plan. I unrolled the bedroll on the top bunk and sat listening. Every creak of the timbers carried like a shout. The storm shutters rattled once, twice, and then stilled. And then something brushed against the outside wall. Not claws, not a branch, dragging weight, slow, deliberate. It started at one corner of the cabin and scraped along the planks, moving towards a door. When it stopped, the chair under the latch trembled. I didn't breathe. The smell of copper thickened, heavy now, pressing against the heat of the stove. My mouth tasted like blood, though I hadn't bitten my tongue. And then, from the porch came a voice. Flat, too low, stretched wrong. But it was mine. Patrol 7, open up. You left the stove cold. The fire cracked hard in the stove, throwing sparks against the iron. I gripped the rifle stock and stared at the door. The voice outside felt quiet, but the weight of the porch didn't move. I could hear it, heavy breaths pressing through the wood too close to be wind. The chair under the latch nudged forward half an inch. The door groaned. I raised the rifle, heart hammering, breath fogging in the cold air. Every instinct screamed at me not to fire, not yet, not until I had no choice, because if it was a man, even a deranged one, a shot would bring every badge in the district down on my head. But the thing that spoke in my voice wasn't a man. The doorframe shuddered, wood fibers popped like bones under strain. Then came a sound that didn't belong to any human throat. A low hiss, like meat searing on iron. The smell of copper flared, sharp enough to make me gag. Then it pushed. The chair toppled sideways and the door swung inwards against the wall. Snow gusted through and something ducked inside. It wasn't fast, it didn't need to be. Tall, too tall, shoulders hunched, arms hanging past its knees. Its head cocked to one side as if the doorway was an insult to its height. What skin showed in the lamplight was pale and cracked, stretched so tight over the skull it looked ready to split. The eyes were worse, pits blacker than dark outside, fixed on me, but not blinking. It smiled. Lips cracked, teeth too many, too sharp. My own breath hitched in my chest, and the sound made its head tilt farther like it was learning me. It stepped forward. The weight of it made the floor sag. I fired. The first shot hit its chest dead center. The crack thundered through the cabin and the recoil slammed my shoulder. But the thing barely staggered. It only hissed louder, steam rising from the wound like snow hitting a stove. I cycled the bolt, fired again. The second shot punched its shoulder. The Wendigo flinched, but the movement wasn't pain, it was anger. It came fast then, not graceful, not human, a lunge, a sweep of its arm that sent the bunk shattering against the wall. The rifle tore from my grip. I stumbled back, heat of the stove on my side. And it was there, face close enough that I smelled rot under the copper. Its mouth opened. My voice spilled out again. Control 7, open the door. I grabbed the stove kettle, boiling hard, and threw it. The steam burst between us, hissing against its skin. It screamed. Not in my voice, not in any human's, but a sound thin and sharp enough to split the air. It recoiled, slammed back against the wall, arms dragging deep gouges down the timber. The window shattered behind it, snow blasting in, and then it was gone. Out into the storm, a blur of pale limbs and vanishing into the tree line. The copper smell lingered like smoke. The cabin was wrecked, bunk crushed, glass everywhere, snow blowing in hard through the broken window. My rifle lay bent near the door like it had been twisted in a vice. The chair that braced the iron latch was splintered. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I fed the stove all night, staring at the dark hole where the window had been, waiting for the thing to come back. Every gust of wind carried that copper stink. Every snap in the trees sounded like footsteps. But it didn't return. Not that night. At first light, I packed. I didn't sweep. I didn't log the time. I just slugged what I could and started south on snowshoes, legs trembling with every step. The woods was silent. No birds, no tracks but mine. The quiet pressed in, thicker with each mile. I stopped once to catch my breath and looked back. The ridge was just black timber against a pale sky. Nothing moved. By dusk I saw the glint of a ploughed highway through the trees. Relief hit hard enough I had to kneel in the snow. I wanted to run, but forced myself to walk steadily until I reached the truck. climbed in, locked the doors, let the heater run until my hands stopped shaking. When I finally rolled into Ranger HQ that night, I must have looked like hell. Snow still clinging to my gear, eyes red, voice ragged. I barely got through the door and one of the guys at the desk frowned. "You already checked in?" he said. "What?" I muttered, staring at him. "A couple of hours ago. Radio call. He said the cabin was clear, no issues. Told us not to send backup." I hadn't touched the radio since the static on the ridge. The room tilted under me. My throat went dry. All I could manage was a whisper. That wasn't me. When you're in search and rescue, you learn that a mission in the dead of winter is always a race against time. But this mission, this was different. I was part of a team sent to save a man's life, but the mission ended up costing us our own. We were prepared for the blizzard, for the treacherous terrain, and for all the usual dangers of the mountain. What we weren't prepared for was a thing hunting us in the snow, and the dawning horror that the real monster was already inside our camp. The story you're about to hear is my own. You won't find any official records from my team, no public reports of what happened to us near a place called Widow's Peak. They buried it. There's only one story I have left to tell, and it begins, as they often do, with a distress call. The call came in just after dawn. A lone climber, we'll call him Julian, had fired off his personal locator beacon. He was high up on a notoriously nasty ridge known to the locals as Widow's Peak. Julian was an experienced mountaineer, but he was way off route, and a once-in-a-decade storm front was rolling in faster than anyone expected. The mission was straightforward, but perilous. Get in, find Julian, and get out before the storm slammed that door shut. They sent in the best team we had. Our leader, Alistair, a 20-year SAR veteran with a calm that defied the elements. His second-in-command, Carla, was our medic, wickedly sharp and even sharper in the field. Ben was the youngest, a powerhouse who could haul gear for hours without complaint. Let's just call me David. I was a tech and comms guy, the lifeline to the outside world. We set out with a practiced clockwork efficiency, establishing a base camp at the tree line, our safe zone for the final ascent. The air was cold, but the sky was clear. There was urgency, but it felt routine. It felt like a textbook operation. The plan was simple: make contact, get him stable, and guide him down. I remember Alice's voice steady over the radio I was monitoring. "Team is ops normal, proceeding to last known coordinates. Weather holding for now. Over." But up on the mountain, the weather doesn't play by the rules, and as we climbed higher, leaving the safety of the trees behind, the wind began to pick up a low, mournful howl. The storm didn't just roll in, it hit us like a physical blow. One moment we could see the jagged silhouette of Widow's Peak against the grey sky, the next our entire world dissolved into a blinding, furious white. The temperature plummeted, the wind screamed, tearing at our gear, trying to rip us right off the mountainside. In an instant the mission changed. This wasn't a rescue anymore, this was survival. Alice's voice, now strained, crackled over my headset as it lost its battle with the storm. "Repeat, we're in total whiteout, visibility is 0, setting up emergency shelter." Then just static. I tried everything, but they were gone, we were cut off. Forced to dig in, we threw up our specialised storm tent, a tiny dome of nylon that became our whole world. Inside, the four of us huddled together, the roar of the blizzard a constant deafening noise. Hours bled into a day, then a second. We were completely trapped. Our job was to conserve heat and energy, waiting for a break that wouldn't come. The professional calm we all shared started to fray, worn thin by the relentless cold and the crushing confinement. It was on the third day that the real horror began. The storm hadn't let up, but a new sound had joined the chaos. It was faint at first, almost nothing. So quiet you could barely distinguish it from the wind. It sounded like a voice, a man calling for help. "Did you guys hear that?" Ben asked, his eyes wide. I shook my head, fiddling with my now useless radio gear. "It's the wind, Ben. It's playing tricks on you. Your brain's just trying to make sense of the noise." Then Carla heard it too. It sounds like Julian. We all strained to listen, the hope of finding him warring with the terrifying impossibility of it. Nobody could survive out in that storm. The voice would come and go, a phantom cry that seemed to be right outside our tent one second and miles away the next. The psychological damage was immediate. Was Croft still alive, taunting us from inside the blizzard? Or were our minds, addled by isolation, finally turning on us? The next day I found something. During a brief quiet moment in the wind, I've been trying to get a signal, cycling through frequencies. I picked up a garbled transmission on a closed channel. It wasn't from base, it was a loop, repeating over and over. A man's voice whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but in between them was another sound. A wet, rhythmic chewing. Paranoia wasn't just creeping in anymore, it was sitting right there with us. We grew quiet, each lost in our own dark thoughts. Ben became withdrawn. He'd just stare at the walls of the tent for hours, muttering. He started complaining about an annoying hunger, a deep, aching emptiness that our rations just couldn't seem to touch. On the 5th day, we got a window. The storm broke just long enough for visibility to clear it to a few dozen feet. And Alistair made the call. We had to move. We had to try and find Julian's original camp. We found it less than a quarter mile away. The tent was shredded, but not by wind. It looked like it had been torn apart from the inside. Scattered among the frozen supplies, Carla found Croft's journal. The last few entries charted a complete descent into madness. He wrote about being trapped by the same storm. He wrote about hunger. Not normal hunger, but insatiable, all-consuming need. He described seeing a tall, gaunt figure moving through the whiteout, a shape of shadow and ice with burning eyes. But the final terrifying entry was a single scrawled sentence Carla read aloud, her voice trembling. The hunger is a gift. I am no longer cold. I am no longer alone. Right beneath it, he'd drawn a strange spiral symbol in what looked like frozen blood. As she read the words, Ben stumbled back. He was staring at the symbol with a look of pure, horrifying recognition. He'd been scratching that exact same symbol into the frost on the outside of our own tent. The real horror wasn't that some monster was hunting us in the snow. It was that Julian had become one, and the infection of his madness, or whatever it was, had already found its way into our camp. When we got back to our camp, the air wasn't just tense, it was toxic. The trust that holds a team together was gone, replaced by a pure, raw fear. Every time Ben even glanced at us, I flinched. His physical state was deteriorating fast. His skin was ghostly pale. His eyes were sunken and he shivered constantly, yet he kept complaining that he was hot, like he was burning up from the inside. The breaking point came that night. I was trying, one last time, to get the radio working, when Ben lunged at me. It was a feral attack, his eyes wild, a low growl tearing from his throat. "It's so hungry," he snarled. The world's barely human. "It needs to eat." Alistair and Carla tackled him in a desperate, chaotic struggle in our tiny space. Ben fought back with his unnatural strength, throwing me against the wall of the tent. He wasn't our teammate anymore, he was a cornered animal. We finally managed to get him restrained, tying his hands up with climbing rope. Ben lay on the floor of the tent, his body convulsing. He thrashed and sobbed, his voice shifting horribly. One minute he was begging for help in his own voice, the next he was whispering in that low, guttural tone from my radio loop. He spoke of the cold, of an endless hunger, of being transformed. "It's inside me," he screamed, eyes rolling back in his head. "It's making me change." The final showdown wasn't with a monster. It was right here, inside the tent. It was Alistair, Carla, and me, armed with sedatives and rope, fighting for our friend's soul. As Carla finally managed to administer a heavy sedative, Ben's struggles stopped. He fell into a twitching, feverish sleep. Terrifying silence fell, broken only by the howl of the wind and the ragged, panicky breaths of the three of us who were left. That was the last time I saw my team together. The official report, if you could call it that, is frustratingly simple. When the storm finally broke about a week later, search parties were sent out. They found Julian's shredded tent, they found our abandoned base camp at the tree line, but of Alistair, Carla and Ben they found nothing. No bodies, no gear, no shelter. As if 3 highly trained professionals had simply been erased from the face of the mountain. The final piece of the story comes from my own damaged recorder, the one I had on me when I ran. It took months to recover anything from it. Most of it is static, but right at the very end, you can just make out Alice's voice, no longer calm, but high-pitched with terror.
It's not Ben. It's not. Oh, God, Carla, don't let it in.
Then there's a scream, unmistakably Carla's, then the sound of tearing fabric and a final inhuman growl that's deep and guttural and seems to vibrate with a hunger that has, at least, now been fed. And then, silence. What happened to the rest of the rescue team on Widow's Peak? Did they just succumb to the elements, their minds broken by the cold? Or did we run into something older, something born from the hunger and desperation that mountain demands tribute? Maybe the true horror isn't in what we found on that mountain, but in what we became. I'm telling you this as a warning. When you stare into the whiteout long enough, you might not like what you see staring back. If you stayed with us through the night, thank you for listening. Stories like these are more than warnings. They're reminders of what waits beyond the gates, past the comfort of lights, out where winter still owns the land. And if you enjoyed this telling, consider subscribing for more nights like these. And remember, the forest keeps its own kind of truth. Until next time, may your nights stay boring. Tonight's story comes to us from the frozen wilderness of northern Ontario, where winter is more than a season. It's a predator. This is the chilling account of one man's encounter with the Wendigo, the insatiable hunger of Anishinaabe legend. If you're alone while listening, maybe light a fire, draw the curtains, and remember the old rules. Don't whistle after dark. Don't say its name in the winter. And never answer a voice that sounds too familiar. This is what winter keeps. I wasn't sure I should send this in. These kinds of stories sound like lies, or like the ones people tell at Halloween to see who shivers first. But it happened to me last winter, and it's lived inside me since, heavy as the snowdrifts that pile up against the cabin door when you're 2 days from town. Maybe telling it will make it lighter, or maybe I'm just passing it on, the way people always have up here, so somebody else remembers the rules. I grew up north of Lake Superior, in a little rail town outside Armstrong Station. That's a place most folks only know about because Bush Plains and the VIA rail stop there before heading deeper into the country. Past Armstrong you get to the Wabakimi Provincial Park, which is bigger than some countries and emptier than all of them put together. That's the bush that raised me. Black spruce, jack pine, tamarack lowlands, lakes folded on top of lakes, and long winters that test what you're made of. The people who taught me to move through that country didn't do it with romance, they did it with the rules. My dad and my uncle both said them so often they turned into stories. Don't whistle after dark. Don't leave food hanging where it can talk to the wind. And most of all, don't say certain names in the winter. You don't give the hunger a way in. Among the Anishinaabe elders, the word was Wendigo. Some wouldn't say it at all. They touched 2 fingers to the lips, then to a door frame. A gesture like closing a lock. I learned to do it too, even when I didn't know what it meant. Later, teachers in town called them Algonquian legends, like they were something pressed flat in a textbook. But the stories weren't about morals, they were about survival. They were about the kind of winter hunger that could make a man dangerous to himself and everyone around him. And what the bush does to that hunger if it gets loose. I grew up knowing the Wendigo wasn't some antlered forest god like movies draw. It was a hunger that wore a person out from the inside, a hunger that never ends. I tell you all this, so you know I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't thrill-seeking, I went north because I needed money. A buddy from college hooked me up with a contract. Snowshoe into a research cabin on the edges of a lake in Wabakimi. Swap trail camera cards for a wildlife study, check the solar batteries, and make sure the place hadn't been busted by storms or bears. It paid more than it should have, and I figured a week alone with boreal silence would be good medicine. It took me 2 days to get in. The plough had cut the highway clean, but the bush road off the shoulder was drifted shut. I parked near the Armstrong rail shop, lashed my gear on a toboggan, and started down the old line with snowshoes squealing under me. The sky was low and grey like wet wool. I made camp under leaning black spruce the first night, the kind that crowd together like they're telling secrets. When you cut a hole in that snow to make a fire, the pitch in the spruce needles flare up sharp and sweet, and you almost forget the air can break your breath in half if you take it too fast. The second day, the wind came hard from the north, braiding snow off the lake so it looked like long white hair. No fresh wolf tracks, no moose signs, just rabbit prints that ended too suddenly in an open patch, as if the rabbit had never finished the jump. Above me, a feather drifted down. It felt wrong, and I carried that wrongness in my stomach until I reached the cabin. It sat on a low ridge above a narrow lake, built square and plain, tin chimney bent from years of storms. Inside smelt like pine planks and mice, which was as good as a handshake. Somebody had even left kindling by the iron stove. A laminated sheet on the wall gave the rules. Conserve fuel, pack out trash, sweep, lock it tight. Beside it was a map of the trail camera loop that the grad students had set up. 3 miles along the lake, a spur up to a salt lick, and a ridge cam that someone had circled with a smiley face and a note, bring extra card. The cabin's rule also said not to store food inside. You never invite smells that can talk to the wind. So I kept the tins in the cache chained outside. That night, I sat on the porch steps while the last light bled out of the spruces. Winter dark here isn't like city dark. City dark has reflections. Wabakami dark is a door slammed shut. I walked the perimeter with my headlamp off, counting my steps the way Dad taught me. 19 to the boulder that holds sun heat, 27 to the lightning-scarred pine, 12 to the woodpile, 9 to the outhouse. You say the numbers under your breath so the bush knows you're paying attention. Halfway round I caught a copper smell in the wind, like a coin on your tongue. Then it was gone. The first 2 days were ordinary. I hauled troll cam cards, cursed at my gloves, and marked down tracks. Red fox, bobcat, a young bull moose with antlers still sheathed. On the ridge camera I found prints I couldn't place, too long in the heel, too deep at the toe. Like something heavy was walking wrong. I told myself it was sunmelt, the kind of lies you have to tell to stay practical. Back at the cabin I warmed a can of stew, swept the floor, and told myself I was fine. The bush teaches you to trust chores more than feelings. On the third night, something called out on the lake. It started low, like wind in a culvert, but it stretched too long. Like something remembering how to make a sound. The second time, I swear it bent towards my name. Not the short version people use in town, but my full name. The way my dad says it when he's not joking. I banked the fire, killed the lantern, and sat in the dark. The sound stopped, but the silence that followed felt aimed, like something had decided to listen. By morning, there were marks around the woodpile, not paw prints, not boots, just deep wounds in the snow where weight pressed through. I put my gloved hand into one and sank to the wrist. That copper smell came again, faint, almost behind my teeth. I should have left, but the weather channel on the little radio said the highway south was closed on the drifts. Leaving meant burning more calories than I could afford, so I stayed. I split wood until my arms shook, walked the perimeter again, recited my numbers. That night, when the wind pushed at the cabin walls, a voice called from the porch. It was my father's voice. "Hey," it said, muffled but clear. "Hey, open up. You left the woodpile a mess." The latch twitched. I knew where my dad was, 300 kilometers south in Thunder Bay. But knowing doesn't matter when your body hears family at your door in the middle of the storm. A voice sighed, too close to a laugh. "Always with the bar," it said, and then softer, the word I didn't want to hear. "Hungry." Something leaned against the door, gentle as a tired man resting his head. The latch lifted another quarter inch, then the window went dark, as if something taller than the frame was peering in, learning my shape. I didn't sleep much after that. When dawn finally seeped in, I half expected to see the door blown open. It wasn't. The snow on the porch had changed. The top crust was shattered in a wide arc, as though something too tall for the roof had leaned down against it. The prints weren't neat, more like collapsed funnels pressed deep and then blurred by weight. I wanted to convince myself it was a wind scour, but when I put my boot in one, it swallowed me to the knee. I forced myself through the day on ritual alone, stoked the stove, logged weather, reviewed trail camera cards from yesterday. The first dozen clips were normal. Wolves nose to tail on the ridge, a lynx slipping between the trees. Then came one from the salt-lit camera that stiffened my spine. At first it looked like nothing, just a blown spray of snowflakes close to the lens. But as I leaned closer, I caught the silhouette in the far tree line. A figure hunched, too thin for a man, arms dangling longer than they should. It didn't move like anything alive. It swayed and stilled, and the clip cut out. I shut the laptop so fast the cup rattled beside it. That evening, I rationed food, not because I was running short, there were still tins stacked neat in the pantry, but because I felt watched. It seemed stupid to advertise what I had. The elders always said the Wendigo was hunger itself, that it smelled, want like smoke. I didn't want it sniffing my supper. The nights came quicker. Storm clouds sealed the sky so low, I could have believed I was underground. The dark pressed on windows like another wall. On the third night, I heard something laugh. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even a hole, just a scrap of sound caught on the edge of the wind. But it had shape, a human shape. The laugh of someone remembering a joke halfway through. My stomach turned to water. I sat at the table with my lamp dimmed, chewing on the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. That was when the scratching began. Not claws, at least not the way an animal scratches. This was deliberate. 3 strokes, slow, on the back wall with my bunk pressed against it. Then silence. And 3 more, lower down, as if it wanted me to hear it move. I whispered the number of the perimeter like they were prayers. 19 to the boulder, 27 to the lightning scarred pine, 12 to the woodpile, 9 to the outhouse. Saying them settled my pulse, but even as the scratches drifted along the wall and stopped beneath the window, the glass went black. I couldn't see anything. The lamp was too dim and the storm was swallowing what little light lived in the sky. But the absence of reflection told me something tall was blocking the pain. I sat there until my jaw hurt from clenching. Finally, I banked the stove, lay down fully dressed, and pulled the sleeping bag over my head like a child. I hated missing it, but it's true. When morning came, I found the window rim crusted with frost, but only on the inside, as though a mouth had breathed long against it. The next days blurred chores, fear, sleeplessness. Every time I stepped outside to split wood or fetch water from the lake, I felt watched. Sometimes the copper smell came back, sometimes thin as a penny rolled between teeth. Other times it was worse. a sweetness, almost rotting, like something dead left under the snow too long. I told myself to be logical. Fatigue causes paranoia. Sound carries strange across frozen lakes. Memory turns warning into shapes. But then I opened the food cache. I had locked it the night before. In the morning, the chain was unhooked, lying neat on the snow as though placed by hand. Inside, 2 tins were missing. Not dragged off, removed. The snow around the cache was disturbed, but not with paw prints, no claws, no pads, just those deep, jointed depressions, pressed too far apart for any man. That night, I heard my uncle's voice outside. "Boy," it said, the way he used to call me when I was late for chores. "Boy, open up. Got work for you." The laugh came again, softer, like it had enjoyed the sound of itself. The latch lifted. I jammed the bar down so hard the wood split around the screws. My breath steamed ragged against the cold air creeping in at the edges. The thing sighed. Then silence. Safe to say I didn't sleep that night. The next day, once again, I considered leaving. Packed a sled load, strapped on the snowshoes, and even stepped outside to the tree line. The silence out there was wrong. No birds, no squirrels, no moose sign, just the forest, almost holding its breath. The air carried that copper tang again, sharp enough to sting. I thought of the long miles back to Armstrong, the drifts deeper than a man's chest, and realized the bush wouldn't let me out that way. Not now. Not with something pacing me. So I stayed. I told myself it was maths. Better odds with walls than without. That night, the cabin shook. Not from wind, I know the difference. This was weight, shifting deliberately, pressing against the roof beams until dust sifted down like flour. The stove pipe rattled. The lantern flame guttered. Something scraped slowly across the boards, as if tasting each one. Then, a sound that almost undid me. The creak of the porch, step by step, until it stopped right outside the door. It didn't speak that time, not with a voice. Instead, it tapped. Once, twice, the rhythm of a knuckle. Then silence. I don't know how long I sat there with the axe across my knees, whispering my perimeter numbers like a madman. But at some point the tapping stopped, and the silence that followed was worse. Because silence meant it had learned patience. I used to think the worst sounds in the bush was silence, the sudden kind, when the jays stop scolding and the squirrels freeze. And you know something bigger is moving. I was wrong. The worst sound is a breath you didn't take. It came in the middle of the night, a long, slow exhale against the wall of the bunk where my head rested. The frosty-rimmed window glowed faint with moonlight, but the rest of the cabin was dark. I lay perfectly still. Another breath came, drawn out, ragged, and hungry. I snapped the lantern on. Nothing in the room, but the breath didn't stop. It was outside, just beyond the logs, moving along the wall towards the door. The latch shifted. This time, I didn't bar it. The iron was already bent, screws pulling loose from the wood. I just sat, axe across my knees, heartbeat so loud I thought it might answer for me. The door bowed inwards once, twice. Then the Wendigo spoke. Not with my father's voice, not with my uncle's. This time, it was my own. "Let me in," it whispered, perfect in tone, but wrong in rhythm, like a record played half a beat too slow. "I'm cold. I'm starving." The copper smell flooded the cabin, sharp enough to make me gag. My teeth ached with it. I don't remember standing. I remember the door giving way, snow gusting in, and a shape filled the frame. Taller than the lintel, arms too long, joints bent wrong. Not antlers, not beast, just hunger stretched into the form of a person until the form broke. Its mouth cracked when it smiled, skin splitting at the corners like bark in frost. It stepped inside. I swung the axe. The first blow glanced off its shoulder with a sound like hitting wet wood. The second struck. The Wendigo barely flinched. It leaned close, and the smell of rotten iron poured over me until my eyes watered. Its voice rasped in my own tones again. Hungry. I wrenched the axe free and stumbled back. The stove glowed red behind me. Without thinking, I kicked the door of it open, sending sparks and coals across the floor. The creature recoiled, not in fear exactly, but as if fire was an insult it hadn't accounted for. It hissed, high, thin, animal. I grabbed the kettle, boiling hard from hours on the stove, and threw it. Steam burst between us. For a moment, I saw its face clearly. Not monstrous, not human, but somewhere in between. The eyes were pits, dry and black, skin so tight over bone it looked ready to tear. And then, as if the night swallowed it back, it was gone. The cabin was empty. The coals hissed on the floorboards and axe dripped with something dark that steamed in the cold. But the Wendigo was nowhere. I sat until dawn, axe in hand, smoke stinging my throat. When the sun finally pushed through, I packed. I didn't check the cams, I didn't sweep, I just lashed what I could to the sled and started south. The wind had scored the trail bare, but I pulled until my chest felt like it would split. For 2 days I didn't stop except to drink melted snow and chew hard biscuits. At night I didn't dare light a fire. On the third morning I saw the rail line. Relief hit me so hard I only dropped to my knees. The track glittered, empty, stretching east to Thunder Bay, west back to silence. I turned once just to look to north. On the far tree line, something stood, thin, too tall, arms hanging low, watching. I didn't wait to see it move. I hitched the sled and walked until my legs gave out on the ballast of the track. I told myself I'd never speak of it. But you can't keep silence forever. The old ones knew that. Silence is its own invitation. So I send this story to you, not for proof. Proof burns up like kindling in the face of things like this. But for memory. If you repeat it right. Don't say the name in the winter. Don't whistle after dark. And if a voice outside your cabin called you in the tone of someone you love, keep the door barred. Because once you answer, once you give it shape in your throat, it knows you. And hunger never forgets. That was what winter keeps. But hunger doesn't belong to one place or one winter. The next account comes from across the border in northern Minnesota. On the frozen roads of Cass Lake, a man who thought Wendigos were just stories, the kind you hear online, fall asleep to, and laugh about in the morning. He found out otherwise. This is the Lake Wendigo Hall. I should probably start with a confession. I'm one of those people who falls asleep to scary story videos. The long ones, where somebody's voice goes low and steady like they're sitting across from you in the dark. Wendigos, skinwalkers, shadow people, I've heard them all. Creepy enough to keep the lights on, but that was the fun of it. I never believed them, not really. They were just stories, background noise to carry me off. That was until last January, when I ended up in a winter hall up near Cass Lake in Minnesota. Most folks know Cass Lake as fishing country. Summer cabins, boat rentals, bait shops, but locals know it's different in winter. It's Ojibwe land, the Leech Lake Reservation, out with the snowbills deeper than roofs. And the roads vanish under ice, the woods press close. And right in the middle of Cass Lake there's an island, Star Island. And in the middle of that island, another lake, a small, round one with a kind of name that feels like a dare. Lake Wendigo. The first time I heard it, I laughed. Wendigo Lake. It sounded like a tourist gimmick. I even pulled it up on YouTube, typed in Wendigo Stories Minnesota, and sure enough, there were hours of narrations. Hunters gone missing, shadows in the pines, voices calling across the snow. And I watched a couple, smirking like I always did, half creeped out, half entertained. A week later, I was standing on that very ice. I was there because my buddy Travis had a cousin in logging. Seasonal work, hauling drums of fuel and supplies across the frozen road cut across Cass Lake. It wasn't glamorous, but it was money, and I needed money bad. There were 3 of us on that run. Me, Travis, and a guy named Kyle. Travis I knew. We'd gone to school together. Loud, cocky, always making jokes to cover nerves. Kyle was quieter. Older, with the kind of eyes that had seen too many winters. The type of guy who said little, but when he did, it landed heavy. The road was just a trail scraped over the ice, snow packed down by ploughs. On either side, white stretched forever. The kind of landscape that erases distance and makes you feel like you're walking inside a sheet of paper. We moved slow, sleds creaking behind us, breath frosting our beards. By sundown, the wind was already coming down, snow riding it sideways. We were supposed to make it back to the highway by nightfall. Instead, the radio spat static.
Blizzard warnings. Whiteout conditions. Highway 2 shut down.
Our only option was to hole up in an old logging bunkhouse on the north side of Star Island. A leftover shack from a cruise decades gone. I'd seen pictures of the places in history books. Drafty rectangles of pine, 4 bunks, a stove, nothing more. And that's exactly what it was. No charm, no cabin in the woods fantasy, just a roof against the storm. We got the stove going, stacked our gear, and unrolled our bags. Travis grinned through his beard, cracking open a can of chili like it was a campout. Guess we'll find out if those Wendigo stories are real, huh? He said. I laughed with him. Carl didn't. He just cut him a look, the kind that he's heard enough. Then he went back to feeding the fire. By midnight, the storm had the shack rattling in its seams. The wind howled like it had a throat. We played cards on the floor, the lantern light jittering, the stove popping sap. Outside there was nothing but black and the sound of snow trying to chew the walls apart. We crashed late. I don't know how long I slept, but sometime in the dark I woke to a sound that wasn't the wind. Laughter. Not inside. Out on the lake. It was faint, carried under the storm, but it had shape. A man's laugh, short and sharp, like someone choking back a joke. I propped up on my elbow, listening. Travis snored across the room. Kyle shifted in his bag, muttering something. Then he went still. The laugh came again. Closer this time. And then right at the wall beside me, as clear as a mouth pressed to the boards. Hey, you left the door unlatched. The latch rattled. I froze, my throat locked. The glow of the stove painted the door in faint orange. And for a moment I saw the shadow of something tall just beyond it, bent wrong, shoulders too high. Then silence. I lay there till dawn, staring at the boards, ears full of my own blood. Morning came, grey and brittle. We stepped out to check the sleds, and that's when I saw the prints. They weren't ours, too long in the heel, too deep in the toe, barefooted looked like, but pressed into the ice like whoever made them weighed 100 pounds more than they should. Travis laughed, nervous this time. Snow claps weird, he said, too loud, too fast. Kyle crouched by the tracks, gloved hand resting in one. His knuckles went white around the fabric. He didn't say anything, he just shook his head once. Back at the shack I noticed the food. Cans missing. The wrappers, though, had been peeled and set neatly aside. Not chewed, not scattered like an animal would leave them. Just placed like someone had eaten dinner and cleaned up after themselves. I thought maybe Travis had gotten hungry in the night. He swore he hadn't. Carl just stared at the cans and went outside to split more wood. At night, the laughter came back. Circling. Sometimes far, sometimes near. Sometimes it sounded like Travis. Once, it sounded like Kyle. At one point, I swear, it used my own voice, soft and close to the window. Hey, you awake? We barred the door. Kyle sat with an axe across his knees. Travis tried to joke, but his voice shook and nobody laughed. We didn't sleep. By the third day, the storm had swallowed the world. The bunkhouse was half buried, the radio was dead, and snow squealed against the roof like nails. Kyle volunteered to take the latrine bucket out. He stepped out into the white, lantern light bobbing, shadow stretching. Minutes passed. No return. We called. Walked out 20 feet into the storm, lanterns up. His boot prints went that far and no further. They ended in the middle of the ice like he'd stepped off into nothing. Travis swore, eyes wild. He said Kyle had bailed, run for the mainland. I wanted to believe him, but the silence out there felt like it was listening. We went back inside, barred the door again, didn't talk. That night, the tapping began. Slow, steady. Tap, tap, tap. It moved along the walls. Then a voice spoke above the window. Not Travis's, not Kyle's. Mine. Cold in there, isn't it? The glass went black. Something leaned close. Breath fogged the pain from the inside. Travis broke. He screamed at it, shoved the bar aside, and yanked the door open. The wind howled in, snow blasting across the floor. For a second, I saw his shape out there, lanterns swinging. Then another voice answered in the dark. Kyle's voice. High, panicked, calling Travis's name. Travis ran towards it. His light vanished. His scream cut off like a door slamming. Then there was nothing. I don't remember much after that. I remember the boards creaking under weight that shouldn't have been there. I remember a copper taste in my mouth, sharp and bloody. I remember eyes at the window. Pits so black, they weren't eyes at all. I remember clutching the axe, whispering to myself over and over like a prayer. You don't believe, you don't believe, you don't believe. At some point the dark pulled back. Dawn. Pale and empty. The bunkhouse was silent. Both cots were empty. Only mine remained. I didn't bother with gear. I just shoved the food into a sack, grabbed the axe and staggered into the storm. The wind had dropped, but the silence was worse. No birds, no creak of the trees, nothing but my boots crunching on snow. I kept the lake at my back and walked. Hours blurred, my watch froze, my water was ice by noon. Once I thought I saw a lantern ahead, but when I stumbled closer, it was only the sun catching frost. That night I dug into a drift and tried to wait it out. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I could hear Kyle's laugh under the snow. By the second morning, my legs shook under me. I ditched the sack, the axe, everything but the clothes on my body. The only thought left was find the road. When I finally stumbled onto a packed trail, relief nearly buckled me. The track stretched east towards Highway 2, and somewhere beyond that, people. By dusk I saw it, the lights of Cass Lake Town glowing faint through the snow, the low hum of a plough working the highway. I'd made it. I was safe, but something in me wanted to turn around. Against every shred of sense, everything in my soul telling me not to do it. I turned. The lake was behind me, white and empty. No figures, no tracks. Just my own. But on the wind, faint and low, my own voice drifted back. It's cold out here, isn't it? That was the Lake Wendigo Hall. 2 stories, 2 winters, 2 encounters with the same hunger. Whether you believe them or not is up to you. But remember this. These aren't just tales for the internet or words to whisper around a campfire. Out there in the deep cold, something is always listening. So, don't whistle after dark. Don't say its name in winter. And if a voice calls to you from outside, make sure the door stays shut. There are some places people aren't meant to live in for long, where the trees grow too close, winter stays long after the calendar says it's gone. Tonight's stories all come from those kinds of places. 3 accounts of isolation, hunger, things that could hunt in the cold. Settle in and keep your lights low. These are the stories of the Wendigo. I live at the bend where the gravel gives up trying to be a road and turns into 2 ruts through scrub and alder. My mailbox leans, my porch sags. I've got 3 dogs in a habit of doing the same things at the same time every day, which is the closest thing to a religion I've managed in middle age. Their names are Gus, Maple and Finch, an old shepherd mix with a grey muzzle and opinions, a barrel-chested yellow mutt who thinks the world is hers to greet, and the lean, nervous black dog that came home with me from the shelter and never quite figured out how to relax. They circle me in the mornings while the kettle climbs towards a whistle, and the wood stoves shake off last night's ash. We walk the fence. I check the traps on the compost so the raccoons don't enjoy a buffet. It's the same every day. And every day until this winter, she walked by. I never knew her name. She was just the woman with the green coat and the red knit cap, a tidy pair of boots, and that canvas tote you see on the farmer's market Sundays. She came from the direction of the lake road and headed towards the old mission, moving with purpose but not speed. She always smiled at the dogs, even when they barked the first week, and she had the same greeting each time. "Good morning, handsome," she'd say to Gus because he'd pressed the fence line like a cop on patrol. And "God bless you," to Mabel, who'd slam her whole body into a wag. Finch would keep a deliberate distance. She'd angle her face just enough to include him. "And you too, little shadow." The first time she said it, "God bless you," Mabel sneezed so hard she startled herself. I laughed. The woman laughed too. Hand on the tote bag, cap pulled down against the wind. "I've always liked dogs better than people," she confided through the slats. "But don't tell the people." Routine does something to you out here. When your nearest neighbour is a half-mile through trees and your phone only works if you press your cheek to the kitchen window, the little human moments become load-bearing. The woman's walk happened between 7:45 and 8, depending on the weather. If I was late to stoke the stove, the bark would tell me. If I was early with a coffee, I'd step onto the porch and watch her hat crest the bend like a cardinal on the snow. I waved, she waved, dogs grinned the way only dogs can, and the day began. As the fall slipped towards winter, the times drifted. Sunrise came meaner later. Frost stuck in weeds like sugar. One morning she came at 9. Another day I was halfway through splitting around and heard her voice float up through the quiet, then turned to find her not at the fence but a dozen yards down, walking slower than usual. It was the first time I thought she looked tired. Not weak, just thinner somehow. Coat looser on her frame. "Running late?" I asked, performing neighbourly as a reflex. "It's what you do when the road narrows. Come small on purpose, so you don't start bumping into your own edges." She smiled, but there was a pause before it landed. "The cold makes a coward out of me," she said, patting the tote. "But someone still needs their bread." "Want a coffee to take with you?" I offered. "That's kind," she said. And that same soft laugh, but didn't stop at the gate. She kept moving, slow and steady, the tote bumping her hip. "God bless you," she added to Mabel, and then turning her face just enough to catch Finch. "Little shadow." The way she said "little shadow" hung with me after she rounded the bend. The timing of it, like she was practicing the rhythm of a song she knew from memory but had to find again. Things are small in winter, The world closes in. You get sensitive to any change. The next week, I realised my coffee was usually lukewarm by the time she passed. She'd begun coming not that morning, but closer to noon, and then later. 2 days in a row, she didn't come at all. I told myself I wouldn't stand at the window waiting. Nobody wants to become a man pacing his own kitchen, but I watched the road anyway. The dogs watched harder. They started sitting at the fence line around the time she used to appear, not barking, just waiting. Even Finch, he'd place his paws on the same 2 divots and stare at the bend with the intensity he usually reserved for thunderstorms. When she finally came again, late afternoon, a pale smear of sun dragging through low cloud, Mabel whined before she'd even crested the hill. A keening sound I'd never heard from her. The woman's coat looked darker, wet maybe. The red cap was gone. Her hair was slicked back like wind had combed it flat and left it. She walked in that same steady line, tote on her hip, eyes focused somewhat level with my shoulder. When she reached the fence, gusted and barked, he stepped back. He's never stepped back from anything other than a skunk. "Afternoon," I said. "You okay out there?" She tipped her head the way she always did. The smile came a heartbeat late, as if someone had hit play on a recording. "Good morning, handsome," she told Gus in a voice that sounded like hers pulled through a long pipe, thin and far away. To Maple, she said it again. "God bless you." The syllable sat in the air like frost. Finch stayed behind my knee. She turned her face to the precise degree she always had, and made the shape his name might be without forming it. "You sure you don't want a coffee?" I tried again, thinking of a warm mug, door cracked, the way steam would make cold feel like a day you'd won. My breath clouded in front of me. Hers didn't. She started, mouth working around the word the way you work a tooth with your tongue when it's finally loose. "I can't stop." "Okay," I said, like I had suddenly become a man who talked people on the other side of fences and meant the word as permission. "Okay." She moved on. The dogs watched her go all the way to the bend. The sky went early dark. I told myself the way her mouth had shaped the blessing was just the cold. The next morning was a whiteout. By noon the plough had not bothered. I pulled on my boots and headed down to the mailbox. My neighbour was there in a red pickup with the heat blasting and 2 kids asleep in the back like lumps under quilts. He lived at the far end where the rut vanishes into cedar. "Road's a sheet past the mission," he called through a cracked window, one hand on the wheel like it was the only thing keeping his truck from flying away. "Figures," I said. We did the exchange you do when there's weather. A shared complaint makes an instant friendship. I asked about his eldest hockey game. He asked if I needed salt. Before he drove on, he mentioned a search party. "For who?" I asked. "The old gal who goes by here with a tote," he said, waving vaguely towards the lake road. "Green coat. Folks from St. Pius all over checking the trails off the river. She's been gone since, hell, I don't know, a week and a half. Family never showed for Christmas. Sister called the department." I must have made a face. He looked at me like I'd just eaten a lemon. "What?" he said. "I saw her yesterday," I said, the words falling wrong out of my mouth. They sounded too loud in the cold. "She came by, around 4. Walked this way, to tell her the dogs. She was..." I wanted to say odd, but odd carries judgment, so I didn't want to make. She was quiet. He stared at me. His eyes had that sharp winter squint. The heat from the truck breathed out the cracked window and wrapped my face in a warmth that felt borrowed. One of the kids flopped an arm free and turned their face into the seat back. "You sure?" he asked in a voice that meant he hoped it was true. "Sure," I said. The way he watched me made me repeat it like a prayer. "I'm sure." He drove away with a crunch that sounded like someone stepping on the edge of a pane of glass. I stood a while longer and then realised I'd been staring at the tracks leading nowhere, my boots making 2 oval holes in the skin of the snow and no smaller ones beyond. like someone had walked up to my fence and not left any trace but the fact of my reaction. That night, just after dark, the dogs began circling. There's a particular pace dogs have when they've realised something the humans haven't. Gus marked his patrol route, shouldering my leg each time he made a turn. Mabel parked her weight at the door and breathed hard like she was about to make a decision and wanted everyone to witness it. Finch threaded himself through the kitchen like a needle pulling black thread. I heard it before they did. The quiet you think is silence until you notice the normal noises are missing. Snow hushes a place anyway, but this was more than snow. It was the absence of the world's mindless churn. No stove tick, no kettle groan. Even the old clock above the sink seemed to hold its breath. Then, Mabel's head snapped to the window. I keep a lamp in the corner by the table. It made a circle on the glass and my reflection sat in it like someone else's life. Beyond it the porch was a grey slice with drift against the rail. A shape stood by the gate. Coat dark, hair darker. The angle of the shoulders that had walked this road every day for years and knew exactly how to hold themselves. She was where she always was when she said good morning. She shouldn't have been there. The dogs didn't bark at first. They pressed against the glass as if it would suddenly be water they could swim through. Mabel made a whining sound again, pitched low and urgent, the sound of a ceiling fan wobbling before bolt breaks. Gus's hackles rose so high he seemed two dogs stacked. Finch lowered himself until his belly brushed the floor, a soldier learning how to disappear into dirt. I told myself to wait. I told myself not to open the door. I told myself a lot of things that sounded like orders and felt like wishes. The woman raised a hand and placed it on the top rail of the gate. She didn't squeeze the wood or brace herself. She just set it there. Fingers splayed like she was testing temperature. In the lamp's reflection I could see my own face ghosted over hers. For half a second I had the animal impulse to kill the light so I could see her eyes, and the human impulse to turn every light on so nothing had shadows to hide in. I didn't either. Her mouth moved. The first time she said it, the words fell out of her like something she'd stored in her throat too long and they'd gone stale. Good morning, handsome. It was wrong. Twice timed wrong for night and balanced wrong for on her breath. Each syllable slurred slightly towards the next as if she'd pulled them from one long word and hadn't figured out where to cut. Gus stepped backward until his rump hit my shin. She said it again, louder. Good morning, handsome. The second time, it sounded like my voice pitched up and dragged. She turned her face towards the porch, not towards the window where I stood, but towards a space a person would be standing if they had come outside. God bless you. She told no one. The way the consonants landed made my teeth ache. It was like hearing a recording of a prayer played backwards. The shape of it familiar with the sense evacuated. God bless you. God bless you. Mabel barked then, the deep, full bark she saves for coyotes and drunken snowmobilers. The woman's head jerked towards the sound as if she'd been waiting to locate it. She took a step forward. Her boots didn't sink. The tote hung from her hand like it was heavier now than it had any right to be. She was closer when she said it next time. God bless you. And the S's hissed like steam on metal. I reached for my phone and knocked it off the table with the same hand. It hit the floor face down and skittered under the chair. She walked into the porch light. There's a quality when something is wearing a shape it doesn't own. You see it in thrift stores sometimes. The way a suit drapes close enough to pass until you notice the seam riding wrong on the shoulder. Her coat hung that way. The line of it didn't match the bones underneath. It was not grotesque. It was not monstrous. It was just misaligned. As if whoever had put it on had done so in a hurry and then forgotten which parts a human needed to convince you. She reached the bottom step and stopped. God bless you, she said again. The sound of the words filled the room without touching the air, like something played inside your head. Dogs went off in a tangle. Mabel hit the door with both paws. Finch spun in a tight circle, nails skittering. Gus put himself between me and the window like he had every plan from here on out, and I just needed to shut up and let him do it. Then, everything stopped. I don't mean the dogs chose to be quiet. I mean their bodies continued to move, but the sound didn't come. Mabel's mouth opened on a bark that had no bark in it. Finch's nails hit wood and made no noise. Gus's growl collapsed into the kind of nothing that makes your ears ring with the effort of trying to find a sound that's not there. Silence laid itself over the house like a weight. The woman lifted her foot to the first stair. The toe of the boot hovered just above the wood. She held it there, as if checking whether the stair would consent to be stepped on. Then, in the absence of noise, I heard another sound. Something like breath, but not from a mouth. More like air being moved by a large thing in a small place. Not a gasp, not a sigh. The space in front of the door grew warmer by a degree so small it should not have a name, and yet my skin knew it. The doorknob turned. I had not unlocked it. It turned as if the notion of locked had been removed from it the way a word taken out of a sentence leaves behind the shape of what it used to be there. The latch whispered back without sound. The door opened slowly, not with drama, not the way a movie would make it go for a scare. It opened like a person opens a door to a room they know well, careful not to wake the sleeping. The porch was empty. The woman with the green coat was not visible in the frame of the doorway. Gus leaned forward until his nose touched the line between inside air and outside air, and froze there like a statue carved in the exact instant before movement. Mabel's tail went high and still. Finch flattened his ears so hard they seemed to disappear into his skull. I did not tell them to stay. I could not have asked them to do anything and expected a response. There's a kind of fear that doesn't take orders. Then a smell came in. Not rot, not copper. Something thinner and sadder, like cold bread. A voice spoke from the threshold. Not loud, not whispered. It came as if from 5 inches to my left ear, even though no one stood there. The house carried it like an old woman carries a heavy bag, slowly, with care. It said the words it had always said. God bless you. My dogs went to ground at the exact same time, 3 bodies lowering as one organism. Their eyes did not leave the door. I could feel their bones pressed into my shins through denim. There were a few honest decisions in a moment like that. Most of what you do is what you were already going to do because of who you've been becoming every day leading up to it. I'm the kind of man who keeps one key in the lock and the second on a nail. I'm the kind of man who says the name of a thing out loud when he knows he shouldn't. I'm the kind of man who hesitates one heartbeat too long when something asks for forgiveness in a voice it learnt from listening. Ma'am? I said, and then realised what I had done, given it a shape to stand in. The space between us thickened. The cold outside pressed on the warm inside like a face against glass. God bless you, the voice said again. And this time, it sounded like 3 voices interleaved, the words not in agreement about when they started or ended. Somewhere in the layer underneath, something made the noise a stomach makes when it's been emptied too long. I felt it more than heard it. Far off, down towards the bend, a siren chirped. It cut through the quiet and then went out, smothered by the night. The dog's ears twitched towards it and then back. The door moved another inch. I thought of the neighbour's truck heat curling from the window. I thought of the tote bumping a hip. I thought of Mabel sneezing the first time she'd been blessed. I thought about the way people disappear out here. One day you run your route, the next day the cold is taller than you, and you make a choice you think will make you warmer. Please, I said before I knew to whom I was speaking. The voice that answered wasn't the woman's, or mine, or any voice a throat could make and still be a throat. It came from the door frame itself, from the boards, from the place in the wall where heat lives. It was not angry, it was not kind. He was hungry in a way that felt like winter. "Let me bless them," it said, so soft I might have invented it just to justify what came next. Gus lifted his lip enough to show one good tooth. Finch's body trembled so hard it seemed like a series of small quakes passing under the floor. Mabel leaned into me until my knee locked. I don't remember closing the door. I remember that it was closed. I remember my hand on wood. I remember the shape of the coal pressing itself flat against the other side. I remember the sound of nothing, louder than anything I've ever heard. I stood there with my palm on the door and counted to 30 out loud. When I reached 30, the house exhaled the way a person does when they realize they can. The clock over the sink ticked once. From far off came the honest noise of tires losing a fight with drift and then finding purchase. The dogs stayed pressed to me. The weight of their bodies was the most truthful thing in the world. I kept my post by the door until the coffee went cold in the pot twice. Sometime after midnight, a search team's lights swung along the burn by the bend. Long slabs of illumination like hands passing over a face. Voices called a name I still do not know. The dogs lifted their heads but did not move. No one knocked. The next morning the snow wore new tracks I couldn't read, edges blurred by wind as if someone had been circling the fence line all night but had learnt how to step in their own holes so the count would be off. 2 days later, the neighbour stopped again in his red truck. He didn't crack the window this time. He opened the door and stood on the running board with both boots like he decided he needed to stance for balance. "They found her," he said. "Where?" I asked, even though the answer didn't matter. "South of the river. Not far. Strange thing is, the coroner says she's been out there at least a week. Might be more. The cold kept her, you know." He looked at the dogs with the soft eyes a man gets when he thinks of his children asleep and wants to stay in that thought for a little longer. She had bread in her tote, frozen like a brick. He waited for me to say the part where I told him I must have been mistaken. He waited with the patience of a man who knows there's comfort in being wrong together. I didn't give it to him. Later, after he drove off and the day narrowed back to its regular size, I took the kettle off the stove and watched the steam unwind. Gus set his head on my knee like an apology. Mabel found a patch of sun on the floorboards and occupied it like her job. Finch lay with his spine pressed against the bottom of the door as if he could hold the house closed with his bones. I keep thinking about the way her greeting changed. A blessing is a simple thing until it's said by something that doesn't understand what it's for. Then it becomes a shape you can step into to make yourself look like you belong. We teach the wild how to ask in our language, and then we're surprised when it knocks. People will tell you the Wendigo is a story to keep men from eating each other in winter. They will draw antlers where none belong and make it into a trophy you can pin to a wall. I don't know what the word is for the thing that came to my door and learned how to say "God bless you" in a voice that made my dog step backward. I only know hunger when I hear it. She doesn't walk by anymore. The dogs watch the bend anyway. Some afternoons when the sky is low and the road is a white tongue laid out flat, a shadow will stand for a while by the gate. And then the light will shift and it will be only air again. Sometimes at night I wake with my hand lifted, palm open, as if I've been counting without numbers and ran out of better things to do. And sometimes, as the house cools and the stove makes its smaller settling sound, I hear a voice at the edge of the room say the old line in a tone that has finally learned where syllables live. "God bless you," it says once, soft, earnest. The dogs do not bark. They rise together, bones and breath and the honesty of animals, and stand facing the door without making a sound. I do the same. Evan had worked night security for 15 years. Factories, schools, shopping centres. The monastery job was supposed to be easy. The monastery sat halfway up a ridge north of an old fort, a weather-beaten stone relic left to rot until a heritage trust began restoration work. For now, it was empty, except for scaffolding, power cables, and Evan. He was hired to watch the place at night, mostly to make sure no kids or hikers slipped inside. It was the kind of job he liked, quiet, out of the way, no one breathing down his neck. The first night was quiet. Too quiet, maybe. The wind rolled down the ridge in a long, heavy gust that rattled the old window frames. The heating worked upstairs, but the air in the crypt level was colder, thick and damp like the walls were sweating. He made a note about it in the logbook and didn't think much more of it. The crypt had been reopened just weeks ago. The lower chambers had caved in during the 50s, killing several workers, so the site stayed sealed until now. The crew hadn't gone far, just the top passage, setting up scaffolds and sensors. The deeper levels were still blocked off by a heavy iron gate. On the second night, a motion sensor pinged at 1:43 a.m. Evan looked at the monitor. The camera feed showed the far end of the crypt hallway, empty, just dust in the air floating in the flashlight beams from his rounds earlier. He went down anyway. The stone steps groaned under his boots. The air temperature dropped with each step, a cold so sharp it made his breath sting. He scanned the hall with his torch. Nothing. Then he saw the marks. Scratches in the mortar near the sealed section, 4 at a time, straight, deep, clean through old stone. Dust from the grooves still clung to the wall. He stared for a moment, then rubbed his hands along the nearest one. The edges crumbled like fresh plaster. Something had done that recently. He logged it and went back up. His radio crackled faintly as he climbed. Static mixed with what sounded like breathing, so he switched it off. By the third night, a snowstorm had moved in. The ridge road iced over before dark. The radio was useless. The lights flickered at midnight and never came back full strength. The monitors in the security office buzzed, lines of static rolling through the feeds. He saw movement, once. A tall figure gliding past the north corridor. A flash, then gone. He rewound the feed 3 times. The same shape appeared for a frame or two. Hunched, thin. Too tall to be human. The timestamp glitched. Evan sat there for a long minute before pulling on his coat and taking the flashlight again. The descent into the crypt felt longer this time. The deeper he went, the thicker the air became. Heavy, almost oily. Every breath felt cold enough to burn. At the bottom, the door to the sealed section was open. Not all the way, just enough for a gap. Dust coated the floor, and something wet had spread across the stone, dark and faintly reflective. He squatted down. The moisture had frozen around the edges, forming tiny frost veins that caught the light. It smelled of rot and iron. Something shifted behind the door. A low scrape, stone against stone. Evan froze. Then the flashlight flickered and died. For a few seconds there was nothing but the sound of his own breathing. Then something exhaled back, long and hollow. He turned and ran. The cold followed him up the steps. A wall of air made his eyes water. When he reached the top, he slammed the door and locked it. His hands shook as he fumbled with the keys. The next day, he told the site supervisor about the breach. The man brushed it off, said pressure changes from the storm could have cracked the seal. He told Evan to check the lower camera at night, make sure it wasn't condensation. That night, the storm came back harder. The generator cut once before midnight. At 1:15 in the morning, the motion sensors lit up one by one. From the farthest point of the crypt, moving towards the stairs. Evan watched the red dots on the monitor as they blinked in sequence. Then the lower corridor camera flickered. Something stepped into the frame. It filled the passage, its body thin and colourless, its joints bent wrong. The light caught the side of its face, pale skin stretched tight over bone, mouth open too wide. The feed cut out. Evan grabbed the flashlight and the service pistol from the desk drawer. The hallway outside the office hummed with power failure, no light, no sound, but the generator's dying pulse. He crept towards the stairwell. Halfway down, the cold hit him again, thick and heavy. The beam of his flashlight cut through haze. The air looked alive with dust or snow, though nothing was falling. He reached the bottom landing and froze. The open door swayed gently, even though there was no wind. The smell was stronger now, meat and wet stone. Something moved behind the columns ahead, a slow, dragging step, with another. He steadied his hands with the flashlight. The beam shook across the walls, caught the edge of something tall. It stopped, turned its head. Eyes like pits reflected the light, catching it just enough to shine dull silver. Its chest moved once, a breath that sounded like a groan. Then it came forward. Evan fired twice. The sound ripped through the crypt and vanished like it hit water. The thing didn't fall. It didn't even flinch. He turned and ran. The steps felt endless. His boots slipped on frost that had crept up the stairs. Behind him, something scraped along the wall, slow but steady. He reached the landing, shoved through the door and ran for the office. The lights above flickered on for half a second, showing a thin trail of frost following him up the hallway. He slammed the office door shut and wedged the chair under the handle. His chest burned from the cold. His breath came out white. The monitors were dead, all except one, the stairwell feed. Through the static he saw the figure climbing. The camera shook, though nothing was touching it. At the edge of the frame, fingers, long, dark, jointed like branches, slid over the last step. Evan backed away, eyes fixed on the screen. Then the power went out, completely. He waited in the dark, hand on the pistol, counting every second. The generator's heartbeat, the wind outside, the scrape on the other side of the wall. The scrape stopped. The soft tapping began at the glass of the office window. 3 knocks, slow, deliberate. He turned towards the sound and saw a shape behind the frosted pane. Tall enough to fill it, pressed close enough that the surface began to freeze. The frost spread outward in veins, crawling across the window and along the frame of the door. The handle moved once, twice, then stopped. Silence. Evan stayed frozen in place until dawn's light bled faint through the snow outside. When the restoration crew arrived, they found the power back on, but the office empty. The monitors were looping static. The coffee in the mug beside the chair had frozen solid. The last camera feed, timestamped at 3:17 a.m., showed the flashlight beam in the crypt corridor trembling, jerking sideways, and then vanishing into black. 2 days later, the crypt was sealed again. The workers said the air below was colder than ever. Cold enough to leave frost on the stone even while the boilers upstairs ran full. The door to the lower section bore new welds, deep and dark, and near the bottom edge of the metal, faintly pressed into the frosts, were handprints. 5 fingers each, long, uneven, pressed from the inside. John came home in late August, when the calves were old enough to wander, and fences needed more wire than talk. His father had taken pneumonia hard that spring and never got his wind back. The ranch he came home to wasn't big. 200 head if you counted stubborn steers twice, but it was isolated. The gravel road ran out a mile before the property line, and the pine forest pressed close on 3 sides like a wall. The layout was simple. House on the rise, barn, and feed shed below it. A long rectangle of pasture stretching towards the timber, and a windbreak of poplar along the east fence. 2 healers, Scout and Brim, slept on the porch by day and patrolled as far as the gate by night. The old diesel generator sat on a cinder block pad behind the barn and rattled when the main line flickered, which was often. On John's first night back, he checked the north fence with a toolbox and a headlamp. Coyotes had worried a calf the week before, so he walked the line slow. The wire sagged in a few places. One post was scored with deep scratches near the top staple, 4 straight grooves running through the old wood. He ran his thumb over the marks, fresh. The dogs stayed 10 yards back, hackles up, noses pointed at the tree line. Cougar, his father had said when John mentioned it over coffees. We've had one drifting through since June. Shoot near it, that'll be enough. The old man coughed into a towel and waved him towards the door. Leave the porch light on. Dogs won't range if you shut it off. The first 2 nights settled into a pattern. Check the generator fuel, check the gates, scan the pasture with the rifle over his shoulder. Motion lights along the fence blinked to life when he crossed their cones and died as he moved past. He could hear the herd breathing when the wind dropped, slow, steady, 100 animals shifting their weight. Just before 2, the second night, the dogs lifted their heads and stared north. John killed his headlamp and listened. Nothing moved. No crickets in the grass, no breeze turning the poplars. The quiet spread out in a circle, clean-edged and too neat. The dogs didn't bark, they just stared. After a minute, they put their heads back down and pretended to sleep. John finished his walk with a tight feeling under his ribs and didn't log anything but fixes. 1 loose staple, 2 cracked insulators, 1 post shifted and tamped. At dawn, he found a calf down in the low pasture, legs folded wrong beneath it. The throat was torn. There were no tracks around the body, only bare earth scuffed smooth, as if something heavy had knelt and leaned close. In a ring around the carcass, the grass had stiffened and darkened. When he touched a blade, it snapped like a dry twig, even though the morning was warm. He dragged the calf to the pit and limed it. The dogs watched with their ears flapped. When he straightened, the smell lifted off of his clothes, metallic, sour. He scrubbed his forearms at the pump before going inside. Wolves, the old man said from the bedroom. They don't leave tracks sometimes. Wind scours it clean. Don't overthink it. That evening, John strung more wire and drove 2 new posts along the north line. He mounted cheap motion lights every 40 yards and tied them into the generator circuit. When the sun dropped behind the ridge, the first light warmed to a dull yellow and made the fence look like a pale road running through the dark. Dogs refused to go past the second light. They paced a little, but then lay down in the dirt with their noses pointed at the timber. John walked the entire length of the steady beam and came back without seeing anything but frogs in the ditch and 1 owl on the corner post that didn't fly until he was almost under it. Around 3 that morning, something tapped the barn wall. 3 knocks, slow, measured. Sounded like wood on wood. John stood up from the kitchen table and the dogs came awake at once, nails scraping the floor. When he opened the door, the tapping stopped. He took the lantern and walked to the barn with the rifle over his shoulder. The cattle were quiet. He checked the far stalls and the side door. The locks were good. He smelled hay, oil, and a faint rusty taint that seemed to cling to the far corner where the feed stacks were stacked. He waited there, listening to the air move through the eaves. Nothing knocked. He went back in and kept the lantern on the rest of the night. The next day, he found the same deep scratches on a different fence post. Same height, same 4 grooves. He measured from the top staple to the lowest mark, shoulder high to him. The dust was fresh, clinging to the staple like flour. The old man heard the door slam when John came in and started talking before John said a word. Don't go up the road to ask about it. Neighbours turn it into legends fast. We've got animals, we fix fences. That's the work. That night brought heat lighting over the ridge and a brief power sag. The generator kicked in and stayed on. The motion lights along the north fence winked, one after another, like something walked the line just out of sight. John stood on the porch and watched them die and come back, as if whatever moved there paused beneath each lamp and then slid on to the next. Scout let out one short bark and then shut his mouth like he'd been checked. Brim whined low, nose up, breathing fast. Quiet, John said. The word felt wrong in his throat. He didn't want to hear his own voice carried across the pasture. He took the rifle and a spare battery for the lantern and walked down the hill. The soil was dry and powdery. His boots raised little ghosts of dust with each step. He told himself to slow down and that he was walking faster anyway. At the second light, something moved at the edge of the beam and stopped. The shape was at the fence, bent over as if examining the wire. John lifted the rifle without thinking and the shape straightened and turned its head towards him. He saw the jacket first, his father's old denim, patched at the elbow. The rest didn't match any person. The arms were too long, the legs were wrong in the joints, the head cocked to one side and held there like the muscles forgot how to work. "John," it called. The voice matched his father's tone well enough to make his stomach drop. "Bring the dogs." The figure stood too still between syllables, as if the sound arrived before the mouth moved. John reached behind him without looking and touched the stock again to feel wood under his hand. "You're not out here," he said, hardly any air behind the words. The porch light burned steady up the hill. The window in his father's room glowed. The figure took one step towards the fence and lowered its head as though it were trying to see him better. Its knees didn't bend right. The wire sang softly as it leaned. "John," it said softer. The dogs growled behind him, fur up, but they did not come down the hill. He fired once, high. The sound cracked the pasture, bounced off trees and came back thin. The figure dropped into a crouch, held there and slid backwards out of the light without turning. John kept the rifle up until the last lamp along the run stopped humming. He walked backwards to the barn and then up to the house with the dogs at his heel. Every step measured, breath shallow. He sat in a chair by his father's bed for an hour before speaking. The old man slept hard, snoring in fits. When dawn finally pushed the dark off the windows, John walked the north fence again. The dirt held no prints, only his own from the night before. The wire near the far post was sticky to the touch. His fingers came away with a faint smear that smelled of pennies. He scrubbed his hands with dish soap until the smell dulled. The day ran long. He checked the herd twice and found nothing but serious movement and a few animals standing with their heads pointed towards the timber. Mid-afternoon, the neighbour called to say he'd heard something crying near his pond the previous night. "Like a man trying to talk through a throat full of mud," the man said, and then coughed and apologised for the image. John didn't repeat the report to his father. He checked the rifle, counted shells, and set the lantern and spare batteries on the kitchen table. He fed the dogs early and clipped their collars to keep them from ranging. By midnight the heat had broken. The air lay flat and wet. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled like a wagon across a bridge. At 1:40, the barn door banged once and swung inwards a few inches. The latch had been set. It shouldn't have moved. The dogs went rigid, ears up. John swept the porch with the beam, then the yard. Then the packed dirt down the hill. The lantern made a halo in front of him and left his back feeling exposed. The cattle bellowed in a low wave. Hooves hit wood. Something slammed the stall door against its frame from the inside. He ran. The dogs followed and then stopped at the barn threshold and couldn't make themselves cross it. They lowered themselves almost to the ground and whined through their teeth. "Stay," he said without turning. He shouldered through the side door and slid the bolt back into place behind him. The lantern lit the dust and wide backs of the cattle pressed tight to the far fence. The smell in the barn was wrong. Animal sharpness laid over by a cold taint like meat forgotten in a drain. His breath fogged the glass for a second when he exhaled too close to the lamp. The far door, the one that opened to the equipment lot, hung crooked on its hinges, as if something had leaned hard against it. The top hinge screws were pulled half an inch out of old wood. Straw packed the gap where the door met the jamb. From behind the hay bales in the centre aisle came a sound like fabric dragging over floorboards, slow, not trying to hide. "Hey," he said, and heard his voice carry and die in the rafters. "Hey," something answered from the other side of the bales in his father's tone. Same pitch, same casual weight. The mouth was wrong on the word, and it trailed half a beat behind the sound. The lantern flickered once and steadied. John raised the rifle and took 3 steps along the aisle. He kept the bales between him and the space beyond. The cattle stamped and swung their heads to follow his light. One animal groaned deep, a sound that vibrated the boards under his boots. The dragging stopped. He heard breath then. Long pause. Air moving through a place it didn't belong. The lantern's flame thinned and wavered in its chimney. "John," the thing said, almost beside him now, not behind the bales at all. The voice came low to the ground, by the feed sacks. "Open the door." His hand moved without orders and shot the bolt on instinct. The door was already shut. He brought the lantern down to the sacks. Something pale and thin pulled back from the edge of the light, too fast for that shape. Fingers long, jointed, dark at the tips, skittered out of sight. The burlap rasped. He fired. The blast filled the barn and rolled out to the open side. Dust leapt. The lamp guttered and hung on. The cattle surged and shoved each other, eyes rolling white. When the smoke cleared, something lay halfway behind the sacks. It was not flesh in any way he'd learned dressing steers. The surface was too smooth, like bark soaked and softened and stretched over bone too tight to hold shape. Black lines ran along the length like old fissures. The wound he'd made didn't bleed, it steamed and hissed. The thing pulled the length of itself back with a sound like wet rope, and the sacks jumped in a line as it passed behind them. The air got colder in a hush, so fast it took his breath and left his teeth aching. He backed towards the main aisle, rifle up, lamp high. The bales shifted against each other, just slightly, as if something rested a hand there and then took it away. He caught a glimpse around the far edge, a face that wasn't a face, flat in the wrong places, hollow where eyes should be, the mouth opened too wide as if it simply hadn't learned to stop. It moved when his lamp moved, not before. It watched the light, not him. He ran. He didn't remember crossing the threshold, only that the dogs were suddenly beside him again, eyes wild, and that the night outside felt warmer than the air inside had been by a wide margin. He slammed the side door and dropped the heavy bar across it. The dogs fled to the porch without being told. He followed and kept the rifle in his hands until his forearm cramped. The generator chugged once, coughed and steadied. The motion lights along the north fence blinked in a slow ripple and then died again. In the space between those two breaths of light, something moved along the line of posts. Not fast, not slow. Head low like it was scenting the wire itself. On the porch, John listened until the cattle quieted and the dog's breathing evened. He didn't go back to the barn. He went to his father's room at dawn and found the bed empty, covers thrown aside. The window opened 3 inches at the bottom. Cold air moved the curtain a little and then let it fall. There was no sign of struggle. The oxygen tank sat hulking by the nightstand, mask looped over the valve, tubing draped to the floor. The dog stood in the doorway and didn't cross the threshold. John called the sheriff. He walked the house 3 times while he waited and checked the ground below the window. No prints, the soil there was hard as cement from years of foot traffic. The deputies walked the fence line with him and wrote notes about coyotes, bears, and wolves. They looked at the scratches on the post and didn't commit to an opinion. One touched the mark with his knuckle and then wiped his hand on his pant leg when he thought John wasn't looking. By afternoon, neighbours had heard enough to drive out. They stood by their truck with their hands on the rails and said words that didn't land anywhere. One old man asked where the old man's boots were, out of habit. John didn't know and didn't like that he didn't know. He found them himself at dusk, half buried in mud near the equipment gate on the barn's far side. They were on their sides, one toe poking up like a marker. He dug them out with both hands. The leather was damp the way the leather gets when it's been left in dew and forgotten. He brought them to the porch and set them under the bench. At night, the generator ran hard and hot. The porch light sputtered and held. John sat with a rifle as the sky went black and the tree line became a single dark seam. At 1:30, a voice called from the pasture. John. His father's tone, his father's pace. The word carried cleanly up the slope and struck the house. Inside, John said to the dogs without looking at them. They didn't move. They stared past him down the hill with their ears laid flat. John, the voice said again, closer now. Bring the dogs. He didn't answer. The porch boards were cool through his boot soles. His finger still on the trigger guard and stopped there. Down by the second motion light, something stood outside the fence. The lamp took a long time to warm, and then it threw a thin oval on the ground that ended at the creature's feet. He could see pale toes through the wire, too many joints in each digit. The skin looked dry and dark at the tips where it touched earth, as if the ground had burned it. The thing lifted its head slowly, like a person trying a movement for the first time. The face that was both too gaunt and too smooth, the holes where eyes should be reflected the light in a dead way. It leaned close to the wire and pressed its mouth open as if to taste the air. "Open the gate," it said in the old man's voice, but the last word broke at the end as if the throat had kinked. "Open." John stood. The dogs took a step back. He sighted on the rifle and fired once. The shot snapped and bucked and died on the pasture like the others had. The light at the fence flickered. The thing lowered itself until it crouched, hands flat on the ground, elbows high. It held there. Then, with a slow motion that never looked like stepping, it slid back into the dark beyond the lamp. He didn't chase. He kept the porch between him and the pasture and cracked the door behind him until his heel hit the stop. He stood like that until the first thin stripe of daylight showed up in the east. The sheriff came back after sunup with 2 more men and a game warden. They found nothing but bent grass and one section of wire at the far north corner with the hooks torn free of the 2 staples. The posts stood intact. The ground didn't give up any prints. They filed the missing person report. They took John's statement twice and asked the same questions 3 different ways and wrote it down both times. A neighbour brought a covered dish he didn't eat. By afternoon, the yard was empty again. John fixed a torn section of fence and added 2 more posts for good measure. He hung an extra light and pushed the span further out into the pasture. The dogs followed him and then retreated without being told when he reached the last lamp. He stayed 1 more night. He didn't trust that he would sleep if he left. The ranch sounded wrong after dark. The generator's rhythm felt like a heartbeat that didn't belong. The cattle didn't lie down all at once. They stood in clusters and watched the tree line. When they did drop, they faced east like something dictated it. Sometime after 2, the wind came steady from the timber and carried a smell with it. Blood gone slightly sour, cold iron, the faint rot of wet wood. The dogs lifted their heads and put them back down, eyes open. The motion lights along the fence blinked once in a wave and then held steady. Nothing crossed. When morning came, John walked the perimeter before the flies woke. Near the far corner, where the ground dipped and held the water after rain, he found a single print sunk into the mud. It wasn't a boot. It wasn't a hoof. It was a human foot, bare, long in the arch and narrow at the heel. The toes too thin and too many joints in each. The whole thing pressed deep enough to show the seam between the toes and the ball. No other marks led to or away from it. It sat there, alone, filling slowly with the sheen of groundwater. He stood over it for a long time without moving. The grass around his boots bent and held. He didn't call anyone. He didn't step closer to get a better look. He turned and walked the fence the other direction and finished the loop, then went up the hill. By noon he had packed a bag and put the keys to the tractor in the kitchen drawer under the rubber bands and twine. He left a note of the neighbour with the feed schedule, the vet's number, and a line that said he would come back when he could, though he didn't know what that meant. He took one last drive around the lad in the old Ford, slow, windows down. The pasture lay bright and ordinary in the midday light. The dogs trotted the fence and pretended nothing had shifted. When he reached the north line again, he stopped the truck and looked towards the trees. Nothing moved. The extra motion light he'd hung ticked as it cooled. He set the truck in gear and rolled back towards the house. In the rear view, fence posts made a neat row. For a second, the second to last post seemed taller, as if something stood behind it and then sat down. He didn't look again. By evening, the yard was quiet. The dishes sat where he left them. The boots under the bench kept their shape. The note on the table held its corner up where the paper curled. The dogs slept in the shade and woke to every sound. The wind came from the timber just after dark and slipped through the wire like it had somewhere to be. No one saw anything cross the pasture that night. No one heard a voice call over the fence. Weeks later, the neighbour would say the herd never settled, even after the weather turned. He would say that dogs refused the north light all winter, and the motion lights there failed one by one without burning out. He would not say what he thought he saw once from his kitchen window, something pale standing at the far corner and watching the house with its head tilted, as if listening. He wouldn't be sure. It was far. The glass reflected his own face. The fences stayed mended, the scratch marks on the post weathered grey. The single print at the low corner filled with silt and leaves and then with new grass in spring. No one found the old man. The sheriff's report listed wildlife as the likely cause. The file closed in winter. The dogs lived on the porch and kept their eyes on the tree line. When the wind came from the timber, they turned their heads and didn't make a sound. If you've made it this far to the broadcast, thank you for listening. Whether you believe in the Wendigo or not, stories like these remind us that the wilderness still keeps its secrets, and sometimes its debts. If you have a story of your own, something you can't quite explain, you can send it to the email listed below. And if you'd like to hear more from the Midnight Broadcast, don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment. It helps the stories keep coming. Until next time, keep warm and keep your eyes on the tree line. If you've made it this far, thank you. Every watch, every comment, every like, it all helps keep these stories alive. The wilderness still holds more secrets than any of us can count, and this is only the beginning. If you haven't already, subscribe to the Cryptid Tapes so you don't miss what comes next. Until then, stay curious, stay safe, and keep your fire burning bright. You never know what might be watching from the tree line.